Welcome to the Patreon section. That's how the Brett Goldstein podcast does it, because he has like a little segment that's in every
Right.
episode that people don't listen to. So that's how we're going to start this, because technically speaking, if you're listening to this first thing, like, right now on the Patreon, you're in the Patreon section.
Right.
Months from now, you'll be listening to this on YouTube going, "You're a crazy person. I am not a patron." And for shame, number one, you should be. And number two, yeah, then it is what
Right.
it is.
It is what it is. It's basically if it's March 11th at this point. March 11th,
Actually, it's
then
March 10th right now, Paul.
I know, but if it's March 11th when you're hearing this, is what I'm saying, because it's
I
going to go
know, I
up
know what you're
tomorrow.
saying. I just wanted to make you sound crazy.
If it's March 11th and you're hearing this, or soon thereafter, then you're probably a patron, and I thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Or a YouTube member, and I thank you for that. Really appreciate that. If you're hearing this much later on in the year, probably closer to like November, well, then you're not. I still appreciate you listening to us, though. So, either way, but this is what you get as a patron.
For shame.
You get
For
exclusives with this.
shame. For
You get early,
shame.
really super early access as it comes. I don't even know what we're doing next on Patreon, because we have the entirety of the MCU to go through, and that's going to take us a while.
And it's only getting longer. We were just having this conversation. Like, it's only getting longer because, obviously the MCU is a never-ending story right now. Not one in which
Never-ending
horses,
story.
drown in mud puddles, but I digress. Other things die. That's true.
Right.
But not that one. And Jack Black is not in the MCU yet.
Not yet.
Not
But
yet, because
that'll
he is
probably
in one of the
happen.
never-ending story movies.
That is true.
I want to say it's the third
I
one.
want to say it's the third one as well. I think you're right on that.
It-
It's not a good one.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there's certain things that only needed a film.
True.
The never-ending story kind of only needed to be one film.
It's funny. I got to say, Neverending Story 2, I have a lot of nostalgia for.
That's fair.
I thought in theaters, but I know it's a really bad movie. It's a
Well,
really,
it's me
really
and the
bad
Page
movie.
Master, like, very similarly.
Fair.
The Page Master is not a very good movie, but I have a real soft spot for it. Partially because Joe Johnston directed all the live action stuff.
Oh, there you go. That's true.
Plus, it has an amazing cast when you look at Macaulay Culkin, Christopher Lloyd, Patrick Stewart,
Right.
Whoopi Goldberg, like, stupidly great cast.
I mean, the Page Master is like pure cinema compared to Neverending Story 2, though, to be honest with you.
Is it? Is it? I mean, other than one has animation and live action together, I'm not sure pure cinema is what we should be calling it, but that's fine.
Only in comparison. Only in comparison.
Only in comparison.
Although, isn't that ironic? Neverending Story Part 2. If it's a never-ending story, then it shouldn't end. There should never be a part 2. It's all one story, right?
Yeah, correct. But they just assume that we're stupid enough to go along with it.
Right.
And how many of those were there in the end?
I want to say there was 4.
That sounds right.
I think there was like a direct-to-TV one. I think that was like the 4th one or something, potentially that. Actually, the 3rd might have been direct-to-video.
Well, I mean, direct-to-TV, direct-to-video, kind of the same idea, honestly. So I wouldn't have got 2 points either way.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I always, like, when I was young growing up, it kind of was like there's a hierarchy. It was like cinema, direct-to-video, direct-to-TV, and then beyond that.
Yeah, I guess. And I mean, you're not wrong, but there is something to be said about, like, some of the stuff that went direct to TV and direct to video. There's not a lot of difference depending on what it is, at least in my mind. Because, like, the Critter sequels that went to Sci-Fi Channel are not that much different than, like, a lot of the Tremors sequels that went direct to video.
Right.
If that makes sense. So in my mind, it's kind of the same idea. We're not talking like Showtime, or not Showtime, but like Lifetime movies. Although Joe Bob Briggs loves himself a Lifetime movie, I cannot get on that level. I can't. I can't do it. It's not for me. I love that he thinks that they're like exploitation films that they don't make anymore, but I just find them impossible to watch. And, maybe some of the direct-to-TV movies feel that way sometimes too. But I mean, I don't know, man. Like, even the stuff on Disney Channel, like, for what it was back in the 90s and 2000s, like, yeah, some of it was direct-to-TV, but, like, they felt like real movies, at least to a point, because they were mostly comedy.
That's fair. It's easier to do that because like a lot of the sci-fi fantasy type stuff, the cheaper you got, the cheaper it looked, and the cheaper it looked,
Right.
the when it just got a little worse. By the way, only 3. I guess there's only 3 never-ending stories. I don't know
Wait,
what I have
really?
3 and 4th one. Yeah, the 3rd one must have been like must have been the direct-to-video one. I guess then I think.
I really thought I maybe you and I are both sharing a brain and having
Yeah,
one of those Mandela effect moments, but
yeah.
I thought for sure there was more than 3.
I could have sworn there was. I don't know, man. I know they're trying to potentially do a remake. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. But I could have sworn there was 4 back in the day. But
I mean, yeah, it's so weird.
it is weird.
It's so weird, and more importantly, it's weird to be doing this podcast now. We've been talking about this for a bit, and we kind of kept putting it off, and we finally started it, and we were literally having this conversation before we started because we're trying to figure out exactly how we wanted to schedule out like the rest of the show versus the Patreon stuff. And this realization that Doomsday comes out next year, and this other realization that somehow Iron Man is almost 20 years old, and I feel fucking ancient.
I do as well. We are now 2 old geeks on the film. It seems like the middle age was being nice to us. I think at that point, it's very strange. We talked about doing the MCU for a while. We always put it off because of just how long it is. We were talking earlier, like we're not going to get through this. Like before the end of the year, we're going to be mid-phase 3. Even on Patreon, I'm saying we're going to be mid-phase 3 by the time like the year is.
Yeah.
That means this is going to be like a 2-year rewatch. We do this every other week, basically. So it's going to be quite a long journey for us. And 3 movies come out a year, so it just keeps extending. This is the never-ending story. Our rewatch of the MCU is going to be the never-ending story.
It's basically this and Doctor Who are the never-ending stories of our lives.
That's basically
And
what
these
it
are
is.
the days of our lives, Paul.
Absolutely. But I think the part of that was we didn't want to be held down to just as one franchise because we want to do other franchises too. We love the MCU.
Yeah,
But there's
please,
so
for
many
the love of
franchises
God.
we want to cover. But this idea of making a Patreon exclusive, and because we decided, well, let's get back into doing more like weekly stuff together, allowed us the idea, okay, we can do this on the Patreon while we still do other stuff on the other side as well.
It's crazy to think that there's over 30 of these right now that we're going to have to be going into.
I know. I was like, we had an idea of like, we'll do phase 1, then we'll come back to it. But this is just easier for us, I think, now. But it is mind blowing how big this franchise is. I mean, it's so big that we decided that if we're going to do it, we have to do it all in. We're actually going to cover the TV shows as well during our MCU rewatch. I'm not going to do it episode by episode. We're just going to do one episode for this series. But
here's where it gets fucking sticky because I didn't think about asking you this until now. So I'm just going to do it while we're here.
On air, actually.
On air. Because if we're going to do the TV shows, we run into an issue now.
Okay.
An issue that I hadn't considered.
Daredevil, huh?
Uh-huh. And Jessica Jones and Iron Fist and the Defenders, because that's all canon now. Because if you've had a chance, spoiler alert for the opening of Daredevil season 3 or 4, I mean, Daredevil Born Again canonizes everything that happened.
Right. Well, I mean, technically speaking, we have the conversation about Spider-Man the same way because the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans are now canon MCU. The Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans are canon MCU. But we decided at that point, I think we decided to skip those.
Yeah, but that's a little different because those are not within the world. Like those are their own timelines versus these are actually they are in the MCU. The shows all reference the movies, and it becomes sticky. And it's weird. Maybe we should just do the movies right now and worry about the shows later.
Well, we don't have to worry about doing that anyway because it's not for quite a while before we worry about it in the first place. I mapped out the rest of the year and we haven't touched the TV shows yet, so we're talking next year's problem. So
it starts to hurt your head after a little bit because then then you open the can of worms. Is like, well, then there's fucking Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Right.
And Agent Carter,
which I'm not doing. Agent Carter, Jesus, right? Agent Carter,
right? Because Feige produced that.
Yeah.
Technically speaking,
I think what I'll probably end up doing, honestly, if I have to make some kind of executive decision or something on PLD Project, I think I would say we're only doing what's like officially called the MCU. Like we'll look at the wiki and see what's in the wiki as MCU and nothing that was retroactively made into the MCU. I think we can get away without covering. That's my own initial gut feeling on it.
I keep getting like so overwhelmed thinking about it.
Yeah. And that's why I
Because
make it,
there's
let's
just
keep
so
it simple,
fucking
stupid.
much.
Keep it simple,
And
stupid. That's what I think we should do.
I look, you know me. I'm the person that owns all the Scorpion King movies.
I know. I have to watch them now because of that. That's okay.
You're welcome, number one. Uh, actually, some of those are actually pretty good. I'm not gonna lie to you. But it's the completionist in me that
I
gets
know.
like crazed by it.
Yeah.
And so the more I think about it, especially because like obviously Murdoch shows up in No Way Home, then
Right.
Born Again 100% was just like, cool, everything happened.
Yep.
And you're like, God damn it. And here's the thing, I'll say this. I railed against this for a while on this podcast. I wasn't thrilled about it because I didn't like The Defenders a lot when it initially dropped. Funny enough, I rewatched it leading into Born Again because I hadn't seen season 3 of Daredevil.
Right.
And I was like, well, shit, I need to watch it. And in watching it, I was like, Defenders is actually better than I remembered in parts. Um, I still just the casting for Danny Rand drives me nuts. And he's just so like they really lean in on and they kind of joke about it at least that every time anyone will like listen to him, he feels the need to be like, I'm Danny Rand, I'm the Iron Fist, and they kind of make fun of that.
Right.
But like, boy, man, the stuff with the hand just in general was not super well handled, I feel like, across the Netflix shows. And it really holds the Defenders back, which is a bummer. But like, god damn, is is Daredevil season 3 so good that I am so
Yeah.
glad that it ended up getting canonized in the end.
I'm going to say that I'll quite blank say it. I think the casting of Danny Rand single-handedly sunk the Netflix universe for me. Like it was that his casting was that bad that I
Really
just
was.
didn't really recover. Like I mean, I'm not saying everything else was perfect. We had this discussion about Punisher season 2 behind the scenes and like how the story there was a little wonky and the casting there and characterizations, but like it still had Bernthal leading it, and it still had some great moments in it as well.
Well,
So it
and
was
it
worth
still had
watching.
Ben Barnes as
Right,
Jigsaw, except they like he's like the main villain for
right.
the Punisher, and they fucking sideline him in season 2
Yeah, I don't
for
like that.
a character who could have easily been any one of the crazy like zealot characters that the Punisher has interacted with in the comics, and yet they
Right.
just made a character for no
That
reason.
is old school superhero nonsense. Like I feel
Yeah.
like from like when they try to live action adapt, like they used to like just not worry about material. Like the MCU has done best is they make their own universe, they make their own canon, they make their own timeline, but it's all kind of like it's still all kind of drawing from the source material. Like back in the day, comics would be like, okay, we got our superhero and we're just going to create this other characters because that's who we want to see. We don't want to be beholden
Yes.
to anything else. And like it ruined the experience. Not ruined the experience, but it wasn't as effective as it could be. That's why the MCU has been the way it has been because it invites you to live in the world that you grew up loving.
Well,
In a
not
way.
just that too, like, even when they do change the characters, they tend to do it for the betterment of, like,
Yeah,
this newer version of the universe. Because certain characters do need to be updated and or can be updated in a way that's interesting and done, a little differently, like, eventually, we will get to Iron Man 3, and I am a big proponent for the initial version of the Mandarin in the MCU.
same here.
Love what Shang-Chi did with it also, but, like, the initial version in Iron Man 3 is so good.
Pissed a lot of people off, but we both are very staunch
Yeah.
defenders of it. Honestly, we love Iron Man 3.
Yeah, I mean, spoiler
Spoiler
alert, it's
alert.
my favorite of the franchise, like, not of the MCU, but of the 3 Iron Man movies, it's my favorite. And
Maybe
it's
mine
not
too.
just the Shane Black of it all, but it helps.
It's a nerd. It's a nerd for sure.
It does help, but it's really the fact that there's so much underneath what they do, and so watching Punisher season 2, I was baffled because I hadn't seen season 2. I had watched season 1, and
Right.
season 1 is pretty much what you can anticipate from a Punisher TV show. I think it plays a little long in tooth, like most of the Netflix stuff. 13 episodes is just too long for the stories that they were telling most of the
Yeah.
time, and I wish that they had not spent an entire season building Frank to become the Punisher again, basically. Like, he's the Punisher because everyone knows about him in New York, but then for whatever reason, they kind of take him back to square one in some capacity, and we don't see him in the skull again until the last episode. And it's such a weird choice. And then fucking season 2 does it all over again.
Yeah, that was the worst choice they could have made, honestly. I mean, like,
That's
that's one of the worst things about superhero movies nowadays is that it feels like every time we get a new movie with a new character, we have to waste a lot of time on the origin story. And I understand why they do that, because they do it for casual fans who don't know these characters and everything else. At the same time, it becomes like this thing, like, okay, here's the character, we're going to find out their origin, and it takes up like half, like a good chunk of the movie, and then like the rest of the movie kind of suffers from it. Then that's why always when you hear like these sequels coming around, you're kind of like, oh, cool, we know who this character is now. We can just get right into whatever the storyline is. And that is kind of how it was. I mean, how many times have we seen the goddamn pearls fall from Batman's hand? I mean, like,
if I have to watch the Waynes get murdered again,
right.
I might actually go postal.
Right.
That might be my Joker origin story, honestly.
It's right. It's like we know. All right, we know by now. Some of the characters, like for example, like I know we're talking DC again, Blue Beetle. I get that. That's not as well known a character and everything else. But for like someone like the Punisher, you just did it that season, the first season. You don't need to do it again the very next season.
Well, you didn't even have to do it after Daredevil.
That's true. That's true.
You didn't. I mean, like, granted, I get why you want to, but you didn't have to. Right. But to do it all over again in its second season was such a weird fucking choice. Also, love Corbin Burnson. Love me some Corbin Burnson so much. Really love that the character he plays is from this crazy religious zealot where everyone talks real strange except for Corbin Burnson. Corbin Burnson just plays Corbin Burnson in the same way that Sean Connery just plays Sean Connery and things.
Right. Yep.
And I was like, I'm okay with this. Like, yes, that's Henry Spencer. Yes, like I fucking love Corbin Burnson. So that made me laugh.
Yeah.
Every time he was on was amazing. And honestly, I'll say this though. Season 2 has one of the most peak Punisher moments of all time, and it's actually involving Corbin Burnson. And it's like, spoiler alert for the older show at this point, but it's the last scene basically involving him. And it, like, Frank walks in and he straight up shoots Annette O'Toole from Smallville, funny enough.
Right. Who we're going to see soon.
Wife.
And are recording a podcast because we're doing Superman 3 in the nearest future.
Yeah, because she plays Lana, weirdly enough. But there's this scene, and it's really reminiscent of the scene in the Punisher extended cut from the 2000s with Thomas Jane that was also oddly cut from the movie and should have been left in. But there's a scene when he kills that man's wife and he puts the gun on the table and he's like, there's one bullet in here. You have 24 hours to decide if you want to live with the truth or you want people to, you can live with the truth because I'm going to tell everyone everything, or you can put a bullet in your brain.
Right, right.
And he's walking out the door and he's outside and you hear the gunshot and you're just like, fucking A, dude. Like, because that's the kind of shit that the Punisher is really built on.
Right.
That show, Bernthal, is so good. I really hope that they get the right writing for him now that he's coming back. Really glad he's actually writing his the special that they announced.
That made me very happy because that's something I have been pushing for Marvel and Star Wars both to do. Take these instead of sinking hundreds of millions of dollars into some of these series that probably don't deserve series, or don't need series, or not like must watch series.
Yeah.
And get them like 1 hour long special to showcases it. You can make it cheaper and people will love it. Love it. You can see their favorite characters doing stuff like that.
It also means that Wonder Man must have gone pretty well too.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a good thing for Wonder Man. Because obviously we haven't had any specials since Werewolf by Night.
Yeah.
And yet they're doing another one. So Wonder Man must have gone pretty well for them. Is my hope.
Wonder Man actually is a series still, but
is it? I thought it was
it's under the new banner of Marvel Spotlight, which is basically Marvel saying this might not connect completely into the MCU. Like it's kind of like side. It's like there. It's in the like 616,
Oh, so
but it's
for
not like needed to connect.
that's so weird. So in my head, for some reason, I thought that it was a special, like one of the like Werewolf by Night. It
Right.
is in fact a miniseries, but in my head, for whatever reason, I had it as a special this entire time.
Gotcha. I only knew that because of my boy being in it. That's why I
Yes,
knew it's a
correct.
series.
No, that makes sense. I am surprised.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that they're doing that, and I'm also really glad that they made it a point that at the end of Born Again's second episode, that they are doing the storyline involving the Punisher that had been rumored for so long.
Yes.
And I don't wanna dive too deep into it. Obviously, Daredevil's very new.
We'll
I
get
don't
there
wanna
in 2
spoil it for
years.
anyone. Jesus Christ, you're
3
not
years.
wrong. I'm just glad that they're doing it because I think that this storyline very much needs to be, handled quite, head on.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're doing it is fucking ballsy in a good way, and I think
Agreed.
that there's gonna be a lot of people who are gonna be real big mad about it, and I can't fucking wait.
Could be. Could be. Could very
I
well
mean,
be.
look, man, I drive around in an area where a lot of these people drive around with those, skulls on the cars,
Right.
and they have no idea what it actually means, which is why I'm kinda glad that the show is handling it head on.
Yeah.
Because they keep trying to do it in the comics, and not enough people read
Pick up on
comic
it?
books.
Media literacy?
Yeah, so, as it turns out, maybe doing it, moving picture-wise, people will start to fucking get the hint.
Right. Maybe.
Maybe. We'll see. I don't
We'll
know.
see.
I gotta say, dude, Born Again was pretty good, though.
Yeah, no, I love Born Again. I was very excited
Yeah.
about it. We were both looking forward to it, especially because we love Benson and Moorhead. So
Our
when they
boy.
took on I forget who it was that was initially doing it, but he got let go or they changed course. Nobody seemed to be happy with it. And Benson Moorhead took over. And obviously there's a lot of the beginning couple episodes, which is not Benson and Moorhead, it's more from whatever was shot already. But you can already tell Benson and Moorhead kind of putting their stamp on it here and there, and it's only going to get more specifically them as it goes on, and they know how to tell a story.
Well, I was talking about this with someone earlier. I think the other good thing is like obviously they've worked within the confines of Loki and they know how to do this, but all their movies are set in their own universe, so it is not unlike these guys to be able to do stuff like this. So it's really cool that they were doing their own version of this on like a very micro level. And
very
to
micro
tap
level,
into
but
this, like the most micro of levels. If you've seen any of their movies, like they are, I'm not gonna say the lowest of the low budgets, but like they're definitely not high budgeted films.
They're very extremely low budget stuff.
Well, the first one especially, I would argue that the Endless is more expensive, still low budget, but more expensive. And although something in the dirt is pretty cheap, and that was because it was a COVID shoot, also, and that was very intentional. What was the one that they actually made with
Synchronic?
Yeah, Synchronic. That one was more expensive.
Yes, that was their first shot in the big leagues. I think actually that might have gotten the Marvel, to be honest.
Well, it helps because that has a Marvel lead, with Anthony Mackie. So, dude, you know what? That movie makes me cry every fucking time I watch it. Do you know what moment?
Which one? I'm not sure, but I mean, I can understand because it makes me cry all the times too. But go ahead, which one?
It's the moment with the dog.
Yeah, I would
every time, because you have to be in a certain spot to go back and like after the time travel, and he's holding the dog, and then the dude bursts into the room, and the dog jumps off the couch right as he's going back, and so he leaves his dog behind, and it just makes me sad.
Yeah,
poor dog. Good dog. That's a good movie. If you've never seen Synchronic, though, like definitely check it out. It's awesome. All their movies are awesome. I love them, dude.
I do too. I do. I hope they get more. I was actually kind of hoping at the point before the Russos got came back, I was hoping they were going to be the ones that actually got a big shot, because they have started to prove themselves with Loki 2, and then they were at the time in Moon Knight, they were happy with them and Daredevil at that point. So I was hoping it would go on, but not yet, obviously. But I'm hoping this is like going to be a continue upgrading thing, and eventually maybe they'll have their shot at like the big connecting movie at some point.
They were my hope also for Spider-Man 4 at one
Yeah.
point, because I was like, if once they kind of didn't know where that was going before Daniel Destin Creighton got it, I was
Yeah.
kind of hoping,
Yeah.
because
They
I
could
really would
do.
have loved that.
I could see them doing X-Men, something with the X-Men stuff.
That's not bad. That's really
Yeah.
not bad. I could see
Uh,
that. I think that those guys would
hit that out of
crush
the park.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. That's possible.
I wanna see them do stuff that's gonna allow them to do some crazy camera movement and
Mm,
action beats, because they're very good at that.
mm.
They're really good at surreal. Honestly, you know what they should do? They should do Ghost Rider.
That would be great. That they would
They
really,
should do
yeah,
Ghost Rider.
yeah,
Like, we know that there's a Ghost Rider coming at this point.
right.
The other idea, I mean, obviously, I know that they would love to have someone of color, do Blade, but they'd be a really good choice for Blade.
Going back to X-Men, if they ever did like a Cable standalone gun, I think that'd be
Ooh,
good. They would be good
yeah.
Cable, I think, very well.
They
They love the
love
time
time
travel
travel.
stuff. Yeah, exactly.
They
So that would
do.
work
They
really
love
well
time
for that.
travel.
So,
I don't
just
hate
really
that.
quickly, I want to insert Marvel Spotlight. This is how they define it. They said that November 2023, the studio announced Marvel Spotlight banner for select series, a focus on more grounded, character-driven stories with less impact on the larger MCU narrative. And it was
Yeah.
created after Echo debuted. It was created with that, like Echo in mind. Even though Echo technically
Yeah.
isn't under that banner, that was like the first kind of idea behind that. And I
Right.
liked Echo. I think that Echo actually was really cool to watch. So
Oh, I finally just watched Echo. I
yeah.
thought it was great. It was way better than I had anticipated off of how
Well, you know
I
what
don't
it
know.
is? You know what it is? I can tell you what it is. I can
Yeah.
tell you what it is. I think that, and I am someone who's partially to blame because I always talk about it on Holy Snokes, my Star Wars podcast. One of my favorite things about the Star Wars universe is how connected it is, and like how everything is connected. And I love the cameos and the quote unquote fan service, whatever. Echo has like no fan service. There's very little connectivity to the MCU, and MCU has been trained to be like, okay, we need to watch this, which goes into this, which goes into this, which goes into this, which goes
Yeah.
into our big finale. Echo, you don't really have to watch Echo or watch anything for Echo or watch Echo for anything. Yes, he have some ties. Obviously, Kingpin. Obviously, going for Daredevil now, it's got that connection. But that's more of the Kingpin of it all. Echo herself, like it's not impacting. It's such a self-contained story, and
Yeah.
we're not used to self-contained stories in Marvel at this point. I think that's part of why people were quote unquote disappointed about it.
It's so funny because I don't know, maybe I think you're not wrong. I also think that there's other factors, unfortunately, at play.
Mhm.
It's the same stuff we saw with the Marvels. Um, there's some unfortunate truth to that, but I really loved it. I loved how grounded it was. I loved the story it was telling. I liked how it built off of Hawkeye. I liked how it built off of Kingpin in
Yep.
Daredevil. I don't know. I just thought it was really cool. It was
Yeah,
really fun. There was some great action beats. The roller rink fight sequence is one of the coolest fight scenes in the entire MCU.
yeah, I agree.
Uh, just good, just really good. And the Daredevil fight is awesome. It's only in the like he's only in the first episode, but it's so well built into the story.
Right.
And you know, man, I gotta say, fucking love this for Charlie Cox and D'Onofrio. Just love
Mm,
it so much. Like, that's the one thing is that say what you will about the Netflix stuff at the end of the day, obviously everyone's got their opinions on it, but those dudes were so well cast and really stumped for the show and really heard the fans and Marvel heard the fans. And to start putting them in other places, to be like,
right.
"Look, we heard you. We're going to use them. We're going to see them again." And to
Right.
keep putting them in different spots like that, it really worked, and it really made all this build up to Born Again that much better.
Agreed.
So,
Especially, I want to give especially shout out to Charlie Cox. I always feel like Charlie Cox is someone who should be a lot bigger than he is.
yes, 100%.
Like, cause he was in Stardust. That was like I think that was like his first big role. I
It
want
was
to
like
say,
his
right?
first major film.
Right, and he kind of disappeared after that and never really
'Cause
went
he was
to many
on,
places.
Boardwalk Empire.
Right. Okay. Okay.
But that's why, because you're not wrong. He ended up on Boardwalk Empire, but if you're not watching HBO,
Yeah, yeah. It just feels like he should have been in a lot more movies and maybe leading his own show or something, but he never really did. And so getting him back as Daredevil is great for him because I think I really like him as an actor, and I also really think he's from what I've seen in interviews, he seems like a really genuinely a good guy. So I like when that gets rewarded.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think he is up there. He, D'Onofrio, and Bernthal. And honestly, I'll even go a step farther and say Kristen Ritter. I think that they get lost in the conversation a lot of the time. Less D'Onofrio, but the other three for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Of just like peak comic book casting. And you know what? That kind of is going to be a thing we talk about a lot because I think that's the one thing that separates Marvel from DC frequently.
mm,
And I think it's because you have a lot of people behind the scenes who really look at these characters as like iconically important and
right,
finding as many actors as they can that really fit the mold. And yes, there's always going to be some sort of like rubbing of changing little things here and there. Like we'll get into it with the Tony Stark, but like you can't look at that character now without thinking of Downey Jr.
right.
because he's that guy. And that's kind of how I feel about the Netflix casting with Ritter, Cox, D'Onofrio, and Bernthal.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
You know, like they're up there. So, you know, let's get into it because in 2008, this studio out of nowhere, Marvel starts getting the characters back. So in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
early 2000s, everything starts reverting back to them because back in the 90s, there's a backstory here. Like all good stories, there's a backstory.
I know where you're starting, and I'm gonna take you back a little further even first. I want to do this whole thing from the whole get-go because the MCU is standing on the shoulders of giants. Let's be completely honest with
Oh
ourselves.
yeah, 100%.
And it all really starts with the other show that the other movie franchise that we're about to cover on the main channel right now, and that is Superman.
Yeah.
Superman 1978, and that the Christopher Reeve Superman was the first. That's a granddaddy of them all. I mean, yes, was there stuff before? And sure, George Reeves Superman,
Yeah,
Adam West
but not
Batman,
like this.
but this was that event moment where like people took superheroes seriously and we started to do something. That Superman led to Batman in '89, which was kind of like that was kind of the stepson
Mhm,
of Superman or
mhm,
whatever.
mhm.
They even actually almost had a connected tissue at one point. Christopher Reeve was going to make an appearance at one point, and that blows my mind thinking about what that would have been like if we had Christopher Reeve and Michael Keaton together briefly. But
I
then
dream about that all the
I
time.
know, I
Like,
know.
legitimately, I do. That's not a lie. I think about that way more than I should.
And so Batman did its thing for a bit. And we started kind of like, okay, so superheroes are profitable. They can do stuff. And we started getting that's what led to like X-Men and Spider-Man. Marvel started kind of throwing their hats in the ring at that point. But they never could figure out how to make it work consistently.
Mhm.
Like Spider-Man 1 and 2, great. Spider-Man 3, not so much. X-Men 1, 2, great. X-Men 3, shit the bed. And we had to like restart the X-Men franchise at one
Well,
point and
I
go in
mean,
first class.
and they were 2 back to back, like,
Right.
'cause Origins happens right after that.
Yep. And then you
So,
have Daredevil in 2003 and like
yeah,
Ghost Rider. They had like they were starting to like the 2000s. They were really kind of like throwing shit up against the
it
wall and
was the
trying to see
Wild
what would
West.
stick. It really was, yeah. And everybody was owning different parts. But Marvel would you glad you could tell that
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
story
so I was gonna
yourself.
say, so here's why everything was the Wild Wild West.
Right.
Not the Will Smith song, but it probably should be because say what you will about that movie and the giant spider, what a banger of a song. What a banger of a song. Wild
And it
Wild West.
connected, of course, and connected to Superman because of the spider, as we
Uh-huh.
know,
Yeah,
the
you're
John
welcome.
Peters of it all, DC gets.
Uh-huh, John Peters, you fucking wonderful human. So, back in the 90s, Marvel Comics and Marvel as an institution were financially very much in trouble.
Yes.
And in order to stay afloat, they decided to sell off the rights to a bunch of their characters
Right.
as movies. And every one of those clauses, when they would sell off the characters, basically came with this idea that, hey, if you don't make a movie within a certain amount of time, we get the rights back. You don't get
Right.
the money back. You gave us money to try to do this. Whether you do it or not is another thing entirely.
Right.
So when they started doing that, certain properties would end up at certain places. That's how Sony ended up with Spider-Man. It's how Fox had Fantastic Four and the X-Men and Daredevil, as it turns out.
Yep.
But weirdly enough, in that deal, they actually didn't own Kingpin. Kingpin is owned by Sony.
Right.
And they wanted him for the Daredevil movie, and so they made a trade that didn't come back to them until much later, which was to be able to basically put a trailer for one of their movies. It's weird. If you watched The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in theaters, you remember a weird mid-credit scene for X-Men? That's why.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. That's funny.
That was why. It was so that they could use Kingpin. So, I digress. In all of this, as the years go on, Paramount had quite a few of the rights and never really went anywhere with it. And the closest they got was there was a Tom Cruise Iron Man movie, potentially at one time. Never happened. So when the characters started coming back, Marvel was like, well, fuck it. Like, everyone else is making movies about our characters. Why don't we just make movies about our characters?
Right.
And so Feige started kind of putting the pieces together, and they did like such a low-key panel. Like, this is crazy. Back in 2007, they do this low-key San Diego Comic-Con panel. Joe Johnston, Jon Favreau, who else was there? Edgar Wright, couple of guys, and they make these like, they're like, yeah, we're doing it was in a smaller ballroom. They were like, yeah, we're doing a Marvel movies. Here's some of the talent who's making them. Like, and they showed the clip of Iron Man fighting the Jets, and they're like, this is kind of the thing we're doing. Like, this is kind of neat. Like, no one had any idea by the next summer that what was about to happen. Not a single person.
A single clue.
No one could have had any idea what the impact of this was all about to be. So they're doing their thing, and even some fan goes, wait, so you're doing Captain America, like you're doing Thor, you're doing Iron Man, Avengers? And they're like, well, we're not going to say yes or no, but like, it's very clear that like with these characters we have, we might be able to do this down the line.
Right.
That was in 2007. 2008 rolls around, and Iron Man goes off like the wildest. And here's the funniest thing. You look at it now, that movie at the time in 2008 made $585 million. This movie goes off like a nuclear bomb. Robert Downey Jr., who is one of the most troubled actors at that time for people, he was unhireable still. Like, they didn't want him. Marvel was real scared to hire him.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't even the highest paid actor on the movie. Terrence Howard was.
Correct.
Like, that's wild in hindsight. And yet, for whatever reason, this movie drops and becomes the first film in a now over 30 film franchise. Almost 20 years later, here we are sitting talking about the Jon Favreau directed, Robert Downey Jr. starring Iron Man film, which is arguably one of the greatest comic book films of all time, and has now become like the grandstand and like titan in this like universe building, moving forward type of filmmaking. This movie laid the path for everything.
Everything else, absolutely. And think about it, it's the guy who was in Swingers, directed Maid, directed Elf, and directed Zathura. And that's who they put their faith in to direct the big budget superhero film. And they choose Iron Man. And it's hard to understand now because Iron Man is still the face of the MCU. Like Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, but like hell, he was such a face of the universe, they had to go back to get Robert Downey Jr. to come back and play Doom.
Yeah.
And Iron Man was not an A-list character.
You know what's so funny? I had to have this conversation today at the bar with someone. This literally happened today because we were talking about Iron Man and like comic book movies and shit. And I was like, we have to remember the MCU was built on B-grade heroes.
Yeah.
And that's not like a dig. They're all popular now, but they were not in the 2000s. The joke of it all is that Marvel was going to have to build a universe without their A-list characters.
They're going to have to build a universe in a cave with a box of scraps.
God damn, that was sexy. Look at you. That was good. That was good. So you have this like B-list roster, and it's not like Iron Man wasn't popular to nerds. He was. We all liked Iron Man because we liked the comics growing up. But just because of us doesn't mean that other people are going to resonate. And it was going to be a character that if you didn't do this right, dude, this thing was dead on arrival.
Yeah, DOA. This is like there's a reason why Marvel had these characters because they weren't the ones that people wanted. Like they had to sell off. The ones to sell off are the ones that people wanted. Spider-Man was what Sony wanted. They sold off the rights to Hulk. They
X-Men.
sold off the right to X-Men. Those are the characters that the other studios want.
Daredevil.
They looked at that and go, I can make a movie out of this. I can make a movie out of this. So Marvel was left with just the box of scraps. Like I said, Iron Man, strong,
Yeah.
strong, solid Avengers presence. Absolutely. Captain America, same thing. Captain America is probably one of the biggest ones they had at the time, but he was also very out of fashion at that.
Yeah, I was gonna say you run into the raw patriotism of it all, right?
Right.
That can be off-putting for certain people, or does he work worldwide?
Right.
Do people give a shit about Captain America? And we will get to that.
Same with Thor. Thor was another big level hero. He had a successful comic run for years.
A less successful stint in an episode or telemovie about the Incredible Hulk.
Really bad representation of Thor. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, correct.
But he's not a Greek god. Greek gods were kind of at least known outside of Marvel, so like you can almost get away with something like a Zeus or Hercules or something like that. But like Thor was not as well known that way. But as far as casual viewers go,
well, and then the biggest one of all this, honestly, outside of all that, is they also have Hulk,
right?
But
which they could kind of use.
But the problem you run into with that also is that when they decided to do that, and we will get into this more in the next episode, is you're also kind of following up a pretty disastrous Hulk film from a few years before.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
so that is a big problem. And again, we'll kind of get into that in the next episode, but like that becomes its own box of issues.
Right.
And so when you're looking at the MCU on the outside, there's no world that these movies should work.
And yet here we are.
30 years later.
20 years later, like 30 projects later, and Iron Man, Captain America with Chris Evans, Thor, they are all like kings of the world as far as it goes. They are the MCU and the faces of the most popular franchise in history at this point. It's phenomenally fascinating to me.
It is, and it's funny because this movie, and like obviously the success of the MCU overall, but this movie is kind of the cornerstone of why so many people kept trying to do this. Whether it was the X-Men movies being like, oh fuck, we have to try to find a way to put all the cast together, or if you have Universal trying to do their own universe. Like the weirdest thing about that one is that Universal should have just looked at their own history and been like, hey, we can do these. But they saw the MCU being successful and they're like, oh, we should chase that.
Right.
Not that they hadn't done it before.
Right.
I digress. But I mean, you see WB starts to panic, and like Man of Steel is 5 years too late at this trend and tries to jumpstart something really quickly.
Right.
And shoots itself in the foot in some capacity because it's really not supposed to be chapter one, and yet then it's kind of forced into one by the next movie.
Yeah, and they wanted to get to Avengers level of success before without doing the work, basically. That's what DC had shots with. But also like it went for Man of Steel instead of like a Batman movie or anything else, it also became Batman and Superman in the same movie. Like all of a sudden we're getting there and like it's just like, well, what are you doing? You're rushing this whole thing. And we're going to get to that eventually as well, since we're going to be covering that's part of the Superman franchise as well. But yeah, everybody started chasing Marvel for what Marvel was doing. And it's not like Marvel's perfect. I mean, let's be honest. Marvel has stumbled a lot more recently, trying to like after 20 years, and some of the things like you got to change things up sometimes. It's getting a little stale for some people. I think its demise, obviously, I think we both think its demise is greatly overstated.
Yes, 100%.
But like it's it's got its own issues. I don't want to
look, it has its issues. Neither of us is going to pretend otherwise.
No, absolutely not. But it's amazing what this film, specifically Iron Man, does when you look at it, how it really sets the pattern. If you go back, you can see so much of this in like the latest films, even like Captain America: Brave New World and everything. There's still the hallmarks are still kind of there. Some might argue for its detriment at this point. Like I said, like it's not. Maybe they'll say it hasn't evolved enough yet, but I still think I loved this film. That's why I still enjoy them to this day. If it ain't broke, don't fix it too much. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, no, 100%. And I think that's ultimately why, for better or worse, I mean, it's why they're going back to the Russos for the Avengers movies. I'm not thrilled about it, but
Me either.
there's something to be said that they don't seem to do very well outside of the MCU, but they fucking hit it out of the park when they're in the MCU.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're 100% the kind of directors who are better with their own with like real producers, not
Yeah.
themselves controlling themselves.
Correct.
Because even their new one, the one with Chris Pratt and Millie Bobby
Electric
Brown,
State
seems
or
to
whatever.
be not very well received.
Yeah, I've not seen it, so I can't comment on it. But you are correct; it is definitely not getting the
Is it
best word of
already
mouth.
out?
I don't even know. But it must be because it's getting like
I mean, it
reviews.
has like a 17% on
Yeah.
Rotten Tomatoes, as
Ooh.
Brett Goldstein says.
Yes.
So, it's I don't know, man. It's real rough, and so that's why they're going back to those guys, because those guys probably need it honestly just as bad as Marvel needs it.
That's why they're coming back. To be
Right.
completely honest, there.
And so this is kind of interesting, and yet you look back and they make it look so easy.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't seen I don't go back to the original Iron Man that much anymore. For as good as it is, I don't go back to it because it's so understated. It's so low key. It's so not what the MCU is now. And I find that a lot of my favorite projects are in movies are the ones that are like mid phase 2 and a lot of phase 3. Like I like when the stories are a little farther along.
Yeah.
I like when I get to revisit these characters in a much more interesting situation. Like I've seen the origin, and I've probably seen this movie 40 times in my life already. Like legitimately. I've seen it a lot. Um I mean, I think when this came out, I think I saw it 5 or 6 times in theaters because
Oh,
I
wow.
was just blown away that it
Yeah.
even existed.
It is extremely successful at doing what it wants to do. It sets up like they didn't have a grand master plan the size of what the MCU became. They definitely had ideas of like I think Kevin Feige had ideas and Jon Favreau had ideas like we're gonna create a comic book, a movie world that's like the comic books. Like we will have some connectivity. We can put things together.
Mhm.
And so this film is probably does one of the better jobs of world building, um, and like laying on the world in a non in your face kind of way. Some of the stuff Marvel's done recently, some of the problems that they would have is sometimes they get too in your face about it, and it becomes too much about the
What's next?
connectivity. What's next? This is coming. This was more like we're just gonna like say some words that you might recognize, and they're gonna eventually come back into play, but they don't overshadow this movie itself. Like
Mhm.
here we get Shield, we get the Super Soldier Serum mentioned, we get like it's just Stark in general.
Well, they talk a little bit about, you know, Tony's father's involvement in World War One or
Yep.
World War Two, I mean, and his involvement in those projects. Like they lay little groundwork, right?
Yeah,
It's there.
there. And it's not in your face, and it delivers so much more later on, which is make this film stand the test of time. Is that you go back and you can go, oh yeah, I see where all this was laid out in front of us, and it's just followed a great path. But at the same time, it's a standalone movie. It's
Oh,
very
it
much a
totally is. Because
standalone movie.
I mean, if you didn't stay through the credits and you didn't see Nick Fury come out of the shadows, which number one, holy shit, do you remember the first time you saw that?
Oh yeah, I was
Dude.
fist pumping. I was like, holy shit.
So in this time before this had come out, there'd only been like a handful of movies that had post-credit scenes that I had seen.
Yeah,
Off
and
the top of my head,
they
yeah,
almost never really connect. It was really like usually come kind of comic ending, like some kind of comedy thing, like a bit like almost
or
like an outtake or whatever, or a callback, or they would be a specifically to a direct sequel kind of thing coming out like later on, like Back to the Future Part 2 is coming to be continued, that kind of stuff.
yeah, the only one I could think there's two off the top of my head that are like led to things and we kind of knew, and one that didn't. Masters of the Universe, which I weirdly enough talked about on the podcast before this, had its
Right.
own. Frank Langella literally looks into the camera and says he'll be back. Spoiler alert, he was not
He's
back.
not back. Right.
Um, Yeah, sorry about that, everybody. And then Fast and the Furious,
Yep.
because it had Dom showing up across the border. He had gotten free. And
Mhm.
then the other was Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, because the
Right.
monkey goes and steals the gold coin, and you realize that now that means that the curse must be broken again,
Yeah.
because
There's a couple other
he
ones.
turns back into a skeleton when he jumps at the camera.
Right.
And
That's right. I remember
so
that.
I was all, "Oh shit. Okay, cool." So it didn't happen, but we all heard the rumors that there was going to be potentially a thing.
Right.
And yet there was no Fury appearance, and it was like, "Huh, that's weird." But then we all stayed to the end, because there's
Mhm.
all these rumors to stay to the very end,
Right.
and fucking Samuel L. Jackson walks out of the shadows.
You're like,
Nick
oh,
Fury straight out of the Ultimates comics
right.
and says, "I wanna talk to you about the Avenger Initiative." Not
You're
the
like,
Avengers,
right.
specifically the Avenger Initiative, and the nerd boner. I had a little red Nokia
Boop.
flip phone back then that had, like, a really shitty 4080 camera on it. I remember recording that shit and being like, "No fucking way," and I took it to school the next day because it was my senior year of high school when this came out,
Right.
and
I'm even older.
yeah, but no one believed me. I was all, "Motherfuckers, I'll show you, here, well, fucking watch this video." Like, aggressively as a teenager doing it, but, like,
Right.
I couldn't believe it, and again, to your point, like, it was all so subtle, though. None of it was as in your face, and again, I like most of the MCU stuff. Warts and all, I still do. So, the fact that this seems so small and Altman-esque comparative to literally everything it has become is so wild, and yet, you know what, man? It's entertaining as fuck, especially for a movie that they didn't have a script for, really.
Right. Right.
Like,
Yeah, it was they were winging it like through
yeah.
most of it. That's impressive as hell to me, considering
They were
that it
it's
is
almost like they were
cohesive.
building it from a box of scraps.
Absolutely. In a cave. But you're not, I mean, no, you're absolutely not wrong. Like, I mean, they did that. They set up everything so slowly. And again, with the Avenger, like you mentioned Avenger Initiative instead of the Avengers, they very clearly were like, we're making this story. We are not doing it exactly like the comics. So don't like get your, don't get your pennies in a bunch because like it's not going to be exactly how you remember it, but we're doing it for a reason. We are creating our own version of everything, not because like previously it's done because like studio execs didn't understand it or they didn't get it. They didn't like care about it. These guys care about it. They just needed to make it the way they needed to make it so that it worked for their film universe. And they understood the idea of making an alternate universe, so to speak. But I'm not talking multiverse, right? I'm talking like alternate, like just slightly different from what it was to piece it together the way they need to piece it together. And Kevin Feige deserves a lot of credit for that. And so does Jon Favreau, for example, too. I think Jon Favreau
Oh, yeah.
sometimes gets undersold on this, but he is responsible really for shepherding in the MCU and
Getting
for
Downey Jr.
getting Downey Jr. in there, and then also he goes over and jumps out and does the Mandalorian for Star Wars. Like the guy is a pretty important character in the past like 20 years of nerd boner film and franchises and everything
I
else.
mean, it's the same dude who, after he did Iron Man and he was like this indie darling, and then like he made an entire movie about critics turning on him.
Yeah,
Chef is amazing. Like,
yeah,
it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
mine too. Makes me a little hungry even thinking about it.
Dude, what a soundtrack too.
Oh God, yes,
So good. Now I just want a fucking Cubano.
yeah,
But like legitimately, Favreau gets kind of lost in the conversation because he hasn't done anything since. And it's so weird to think, like, actually, he'd probably make a killer Avengers movie. I'm a little surprised he didn't jump at it.
yeah. Well, I know that after reading, like, I read a bunch of books and everything else. And if you read I forget, I wish I had the name of the book in front of me that had that big history of the
Yeah,
MCU.
yeah, yeah.
Or whatever. John was very tired out at the end of this
Oh,
one,
sure.
and he just didn't like want to do much more. They want, or he did two, but after two, he was like, "Yeah, I'm done after that." I'm actually surprised he jumped ship to Star Wars and was willing to go for fall in on that. But I think he had Dave Filoni to work with, so that helped him.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
At that point, I think he got so much more interested in the technical side of things and like developing all the special effects, the computer graphic
He's
stuff,
a
and everything
little
else.
George Lucasy.
He really is.
He
He
was a little
really
George
is.
Lucasy, man.
Yeah. That's why he probably works so well with Filoni, to a degree. At least that's how it goes. Because they exactly what it is. They have good stories. They want to push the envelope on how those stories are presented, whether it be technical or in this case an MCU, like building out like a story the way they did, and it's just a successful. It's that right perfect storm of the right creative minds coming together and making it work,
Yeah,
and
and
that's what
that's
happens.
where this movie was born out of,
Yeah,
man, and it's wild to watch it because
yeah,
the thing that I find most interesting is that it has very little action for being a
yeah,
superhero film.
yeah.
Uh, Most of the action throughout the movie is, like, more based on him learning to be Iron Man than it is about, like, actually fighting anyone.
Yeah.
Because even the scene when he finally goes back to the Middle East to save all those people, he shoots a missile at a tank. Like, there's really not action involved. Like, he's not beating people up.
No,
There's the cave sequence, but even the fight with Monger is, like, not hugely interesting and exciting, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that all the action is more about his character and the
right,
way he evolves.
right. Um, yeah, because I mean, you gotta say it. We don't even see Tony in an Iron Man suit, any Iron Man suit, until like 40 minutes into the movie.
Mhm,
40 minutes into the
mhm.
movie. This is not like a 3, 4 hour. It's like a what 2 hour movie, probably. I would say. I
Yeah,
don't
just
even know.
about just under 2 hours, I think.
So yeah, and what superhero film can you think of that you don't get the superhero in their like, get up
Or
for
just over 2
40
hours,
minutes?
actually. 1 hour and 2 hours and 6 minutes.
Okay, there you go. And like, but even that reveal is just like the beginning. We don't get Iron Man like in the actual Iron Man suit we know and love and everything else till like at least an hour plus in.
Yeah,
It's
and
like
very little, by the way.
right, yeah, and
Like, very little.
yeah, it's more about Tony and Pepper and Brody and those like little individual performances and connections that they have. Tony and Stain and
Yeah,
those are the connectivity that matters. It becomes this tale of who is Tony Stark, not who is Iron Man, who is Tony Stark.
mhm.
And that's one reason why I think the film works so well.
Well, and I actually think that's why ultimately, and again, we'll kinda get to it through each movie, I think that's why Phase 1 is so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I
No, I
think
agree.
that ultimately the thing about those movies is that all of them are about who are these characters. And I think it's actually the thing that most of the sequels really land to.
Yeah.
Most of. Again, I'm not gonna say that everything is perfect, but, like, Winter Soldier really leans on that same thing. Ragnarok really leans on that same thing. Like, a lot of the sequels, when they're done really well, really lean on we are still committed to figuring out who these people are.
Right. Because that's much more important than who they're going to fight
Yeah.
or whatever. As much as we love a good old fashion slobber knocker, as JR would say back in wrestling days, we
Mhm.
love those. Those are things that actually spur a lot of discussion. Ooh, who could win? This versus this person, this. Yeah, that's great. But if you don't care about the combatant, then the stakes aren't there as high, and you can't like you're not bawling like we are. We're at the end of like Infinity War when we're losing all these characters left and right.
Yeah.
Even as we knew we were going to get them back, we knew we were going to
Yeah,
get them back.
they had already announced another Spider-Man film.
Right,
We knew one was coming.
right, exactly. It was like
Like,
so, but like at the same time, that still worked. The snapping in still worked, and we'll get to that obviously by next year. But
it's just so wild to me to think because I feel like there's gonna be a lot of and don't worry, we will get back to this. We will talk about this. But it's just so weird because I can't there's not a lot of franchises where you're 30 movies deep, and there's so much that we could talk about from movies that came out in the last year and a half
right,
that are equally as important moment-wise to stuff that happens here.
right,
And it's just it's mind-blowing, dude.
it
Like, the
really
more I
is.
think about it, it's just so crazy, and here we are all over again, and yet it's so good. It's so fun. Uh, you know, Sitting and watching it, I was really taken just how in like how easily and efficiently it makes you care about Tony. And I really have to credit that to a lot of the opening of the film because it has a brilliant cold open that we will eventually get back to, like within the film. But to have it be the Humvee attack up front, to have us see him being like his rich playboy kind of nonchalant dude who gets attacked with his own weapons, and then we flash back to the day before and you see just he doesn't give a shit about any of this, and yet then you're like, fuck, dude, how is that dude gonna survive all this?
Right. I mean, I my first note when watching this film was in 30 seconds, you know who Tony Stark is. Like
Yeah.
Robert Downey Jr., this is without a doubt one of the greatest castings of a comic book character in there. I would say it's top 5 for sure. You could throw
I'd
in
argue it
there.
might be the
It
comic
might
book
be
casting.
the only one whoever the person I always argue is number 1 is a supporting role, and that's J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson.
Actually, I take this back. There's one above, and it
Okay.
is the grandfather of all comic book casting. Christopher Reeve was Superman. It was arguably the most important comic book casting of all time. Like, and I'm not doing a bit. Like, I'm being dead serious. If it wasn't for Christopher Reeve being Superman, we would not believe a man could fly. We never would have gotten to where we ended up. I think Christopher Reeve remains the pinnacle comic book casting.
Mhm.
From there, yes, then you can have at it.
Yep.
And then there's Jackman.
Yep. Jackman Wolverine. Yep, I'll say that. I had this conversation the other day about this too, and yeah, Jackman, despite his height, was still a perfectly cast thing. You could also throw out there, even though it's not comic related, like Ian McKellen as Gandalf was pretty
Yeah.
solid as well that way. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to coming back to here, is Tony Stark became so important that like it's kind of funny to hard to think like if Tony wasn't if it wasn't Robert Downey Jr. or someone else playing it, say it was Tom Cruise playing it, and Tom Cruise would not have been perfect for it. He would have been okay. I think he could have pulled it off, but it wouldn't have been the same level at all. And because of how good Robert Downey Jr. is, he is able to take the MCU on his back and carry it with him. Like
Yeah.
he makes an appearance in the end of when we'll spoiler, we'll get to the Hulk tomorrow or whenever we record the Hulk, whenever you hear the Hulk, like he has that post credit appearance, and you're like, you sit up, like, oh, it's Downey Jr. in there, it's Tony Stark in there. Oh, what's going to happen now? Because he made you care about the entire universe. He was the center of that universe. He
Yeah.
still to this day is. They've had a hard. I think that's the one thing Marvel has struggled to do is they've had a hard time replacing that beating heart of the universe. And Chris Evans is similar. Like they've had a hard time replacing him as well. Obviously, as much as I love Sam Wilson as I love Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson Falcon, and he is the new Captain America, and he's earned that stripes. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But there is something missing about that general Tony Stark, Chris Evans, and to a lesser degree Chris Hemsworth as Thor, that just kind of like developed exactly how it was supposed to.
And I do think that there's something to be said about they moved too quick into continuing.
Mm,
And that's a conversation for another time. But the truth of the matter is I think a lot of it is that the way that Endgame ended, they had set it up front. They were like, we looked at Star Trek: The Next Generation. We wanted to go out the way that Star Trek Generation went out.
right.
And you can argue that Star Trek: The Next Generation did the same shit
Yeah.
because that ending is so poignant, and yet you ended up with 4 movies of varying quality, and
Right.
it wasn't until Picard that we finally got, like, another fitting ending.
Right.
So, they kind of fell into the same trap of feeling like they had to continue forward, and the thing is they could have easily done it and continued to build around it because there's, again, plenty of great stuff in these last couple of phases.
Yeah.
But the problem is that there's a lot there's a lot of the focus doesn't seem as pointed.
There's not as
And
much focus. That's the issue. There's
right,
not as
well,
much
that's what I
focus.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah. And you have characters who can be the beating heart.
Right.
Strange is there, Spider-Man is there. Like, they also ran into the T'Challa of it all. That
Mhm.
really set them back. What happened with Chadwick was a
Tragic.
huge problem.
Mhm.
Uh, Heartbreaking for all of us, a problem for them.
Yeah.
Both can be true. So, you had the Guardians going away because Gunn was not Gunn was like 3 and done. Like, that was it. So, you were also running into the problem of how do you move forward, and they probably should have leaned on some of the other stuff more. But I think they're also getting there. I think we're gonna see it in Thunderbolts. I think we're seeing it with Daredevil. We saw it with you and I liked Cap more than most people.
We did,
Uh,
yeah.
like, it is what it is, but it all kinda comes back to the characters and how you portray them, and I think that that's why it worked here. You're right, 100%. And they you know, it's funny because you also could say the same thing about Gwyneth Paltrow. I
Yeah,
think her as Potts is a huge part of why this movie works because her and Downey Jr. have this undeniable, beautiful, sexy chemistry.
right. Because she plays this character that you feel can stand toe to toe with Tony Stark like no one else can. No one else can stand up to Tony Stark like that. But she
No,
does it with grace, style, and you believe it when she humbles him that he needs her as much as more than she needs him. To be honest
mm.
with you.
Well,
Um,
that's why that scene when they're at the Disney Music Hall is so like poignant. When
yeah.
they start to dance and you start to see like the real feelings that clearly have been bubbling up over time,
Mhm.
and she starts to panic because she goes, you know, people are going to look at me different.
Right.
They're going to think I'm sleeping with my boss, and he's kind of like, well, you know, would that really be so bad
Right.
in
Right.
some
Yeah.
capacity? You know, like, what if there is something here? And you know, I really love that.
Yeah.
Their character, their connection, everything about the way that they are is part of why this
Genuine.
movie works so well.
It's genuine.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun. Going back to Downey Jr. is like that. I don't know who else could have done it, but his character is he's a dick. He is a
Oh, he's
big,
terrible.
huge dick, and yet you root for him. Like you want him to succeed, and you want him to win the day, and you root for Pepper too. You root for Pepper to kind of put him in his place because only she can, like you said. But that's a tough. That's a tough kind of thing to straddle for Robert Downey Jr. to be the superhero, lead the movie, who's also got to be a dick and doesn't have a whole lot of great redeeming qualities, but yet pull it off where you're still like you're all in because I am not in on this movie at any real given any point, give or take.
No, because honestly, you're sitting there rooting for this guy
Right.
to get better
Yeah.
because he's so likable as a performance and so likable as a person that is so unlikable that you're actually rooting for him to get better,
Yeah.
just like the people around him. And so here's what's funny. You and I have a little bit of a different opinion on the Terrence Howard of it all.
Yeah, we're gonna
And
get into this. That's funny.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
talk about it.
I mean, that's why I'm moving into it because ultimately, here's what I'll say. I think it's also just because we've had so much of someone else in the role.
Right.
We've spent so much time with another actor in the role.
Right.
It's almost unfair. But I have come to prefer the performance of another actor as James Rhodes than the Terrence Howard performance.
Yeah,
That
you do like Don Cheadle, and that's okay.
I do. I love Don Cheadle. That being said, in this film, this is the performance that needs to be given for Rhodes.
I am very happy to hear you say that because that was
Yes.
actually part of the crux of my argument. Because I said, because you texted me this about Don Cheadle, I was like, yeah, that's funny because I actually prefer Terrence Howard's performance, and it's because you need him, you need that performance in this film for it to work. Because Don Cheadle is a phenomenal actor. No, I have no problem with Don Cheadle. It's not like I don't like Don Cheadle, but he plays kind of more of a how do you say like it's not, I don't say weaker is not the word, but he's more under Tony Stark's thumb a little more
I think it's also because there's a dynamic
subservient.
shift.
Yeah, yeah, but that's I guess that's what I mean.
Yeah, and I think it's you're not wrong, but I think it's a built-in dynamic shift for better or
Mhm,
worse, if that makes
that
sense.
could be. I mean, I am very. I wish I one of those alternate worlds. I wish I could visit to see what Terrence Howard would have done if he had come back.
Yeah, for
How that
sure.
would have changed things because it would have been an interesting dynamic. Because I love how Terrence Howard is the other person who kind of keeps Tony
Yeah.
somewhat in check. Not, I mean, Tony always gets the best of him. Tony never gets the best of Pepper. Usually gets the best of Rhodey, but Rhodey still has this. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like this kind of like
They're
equality
they're
with
they're still
Tony.
equals because
Yeah.
Tony still respects him.
Right.
He just also sees that, and that's why the dynamic shift of the characters doesn't bother me as much
Right. Yeah.
in the later movie. And so, because I still think, I mean, it's me looking at Iron Man too, but his first line of "It's me, I'm here, deal with it" feels
Right.
very like exactly what I expect out of Rhodey.
Right. I
And
think honestly for me, and I'll throw it out there too. This might be a completely pedantic, petty. Not even petty is the wrong word, but like stupid way to look at it. But I have a hard time. It's physicality, and
that's
Terrence
fair.
Howard's physicality of James Brody makes more sense. Don Lanky's just so like lanky and small. He looks small. Like it's hard to see him as just like big war machine kind of thing. Where like
Fair.
Terrence Howard feels like he fits the suit.
That's
Don
fair.
Cheadle feels like the little bit more the nebbish bookkeeper kind of almost kind of in a way
I keep hoping that somehow we're gonna get a multiverse cameo
from
from
Terrence.
Howard, and they
That would be
kind of
great,
like if they could just kind of full circle it for a moment
right?
and get him a chance to, because we never really got next time baby
It's
from
time,
him. You know
baby.
what I mean? Like,
Mm.
could you imagine if the next time we saw him,
He's in
if
the
it
suit.
ever
Yeah,
happened, he was in the suit and the mask comes up and it's fucking Terrence Howard?
that'd be great. That would
It'd
be
be pretty
great.
good.
Uh,
It'd be a nerd pop moment for sure. Let me tell you. No, here's what I'll say, because I really do like him in the movie.
yeah.
I
This
do.
is some of my favorite some of my favorite parts are Tony and him together. So some of my favorite like comic moments, my favorite like action B moments, like hell, like the one of the very first funny sequences is when they're on the plane together, and he's like, "I'm not drinking. We're late. We're not." And then they say cuts to
It would
them.
be irresponsible not to drink.
Also, they're drinking together like the first shots out, and he's like drunk off his ass. It's so perfectly that relationship to me.
Yeah.
That's what it sums it up for me the whole time. But
Well, and that's why I like the sequence involving the airplanes and
yes,
in
so
with the
good.
F-16s or the F-22s or whatever planes it is. Sorry to all our aviation enthusiasts who I have no idea what these planes are other than that they are fast and Iron Man is flying against them.
They're
So,
military jets. That's what we know.
yes. And they may not even be that because they could just be CGI and that's fine
Yeah.
too. So, there's a sequence in the movie involving two fighter jets going after Stark, and he's on the phone with Rhodes, and Rhodes clearly knows it's him. And
Right.
he calls him, and Iron Man has it built into the suit that he can talk to him. And he's like, Tony, what's that sound? Oh, I'm driving. I'm driving. Don't worry about it. Okay, well, there's this bogey flying through the sky, and we're going after it. Oh, okay, bye, bye, bye. And he like hangs up.
I'm
And,
jogging. Like I thought
yeah.
you were driving. I was driving to jogging.
And then the cut back to them trying to blow him out of the sky. And so then he calls back and he goes, "It's me.
It's me.
Yes, I know it's you. No, no, no. It's me
Me.
in the suit.
It's me.
That's me."
Like, oh,
And then him trying to be like, "How am I going to explain myself out of this?" Well, just tell him it was
training
a
exercise.
training
That's
exercise.
what you always
That's
say,
not going to
right?
work. That no one's going to believe that. And then the hard cut to a training exercise. I there's the he's so good in those moments, and
Yeah.
but I also think there's a lot of truth to like there's a lot of the writing in that too,
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
lot of the editing. This movie, I said it earlier, it's very Altman-esque to me.
It
And
really is.
for those who don't know what that means or understand where I'm coming from, Robert Altman is one of my all-time favorite filmmakers, and he is one of those guys who he lets things linger. He let people talk over people. He found a way to make every movie you watched of his kind of feel human in some capacity. And yet they'd always find like smart edits, quick cuts, ways to heighten a movie, a character, a moment, whatever it was. And Altman's kind of flavor and like zest for dialogue in life, it really played a part into why I fell in love with shit like The West Wing and like Aaron Sorkin and the filmmakers and the writers who love to lean on that. And Favreau loves that stuff. It's
Oh
why
yeah.
his early movies that he was involved in are very similar to that in some
Mhm.
capacity. And so he infuses a lot of that here because there's a lot of the cross-cut talking. There's a lot of that, the hard cuts to like a comedic beat off of a moment. There's a lot of that going on, and you can feel it being infused off of movies like that. And it's why I've always loved his films so much, because they just kind of speak to me on a visceral level. Like, please go back and watch the MASH movie. Like, and that's no shade at the show. I fucking love the show, but like, watch the movie and
Yeah,
tell me
100%.
how much it's like influenced so much of what you've watched.
Oh, absolutely. I went back on the Altman binge for a while, and I watched MASH very recently, actually, very recently, and
God,
I
how good
hadn't
is it?
seen it in forever. I kind of like forgot how good it was.
Yeah,
It's just really solid film. That and what's another one I watched recently?
you watch
I guess
Gosford
not so long
Park?
ago. Got far. I went Long Goodbye.
That which okay, funny enough, I was about to say this to you, and I legitimately mean this, and no one is ever prepared for this moment when I say it. I don't talk about this movie a lot. This to me is arguably one of the most perfect films ever made. It has arguably the top 3 endings of any movie ever made. It is one of my favorite movies ever. I fucking love this movie, and Elliot Gould is remarkable in it.
Yes, he really is, and
Fucking
it
love Long
is.
Goodbye.
It's one of my favorites. I don't talk about nearly as much either, or nearly enough as well. But it does, and it's exactly what you say. What you're talking about, this movie, Iron Man, like as far as like what John Favreau took from it, long shots, letting it breathe, letting the characters tell the story. But then they have those moments where it just does a quick cut or something that gets you where you need to go story
Yeah.
wise. That lets that keep it never. You can never argue with pacing over
No.
it. They're slow paced, but they're well paced. Methodical.
Methodically paced.
Yes, 100%.
It's actually funny enough, one movie that does it really well, and I have been saying this since it came out, and I really believe this, and I really want people who don't love this movie and or haven't seen more of Altman's movies, and if they like this movie, to go check out more of his stuff, is Uncut Gems. Because
Yeah.
Uncut Gems is a Robert Altman movie on lots of cocaine.
Yes.
Like, just straight up, it is just a Robert Altman movie with lots of cocaine. And I leaned over to our friend Maxwell after the movie, and I remember going, yeah, I just watched a Robert Altman movie on so much cocaine, and I don't know how I feel. Like, my heart couldn't stop beating. I was just so into it.
And my poor nostalgic childhood heart would also have to point out that I was a big fan of the Popeye movie.
Well, dude, it's a fucking good movie. It
Great
is.
movie.
It's a good movie. Like, it's a good fucking movie. We are not pretending that Popeye is not good.
That shouldn't have worked. There's no way. There's no world this should have worked, and yet it did everything exactly right. Hell, that's a comic book movie, for example, a technically cartoon comic book movie come to life with the wonderful, amazing,
Fucking
of course, Robin
Williams.
Williams in the
So
leading
good.
role. There's so much that's good in that movie. Like the end there when Bluto and the octopus go at it, and Bluto his actual clothes turn yellow as he
Yeah, dude.
swims away. It's just so like
I get
weird and
tired of
bizarre.
pretending that certain movies aren't good. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I agree.
There's
Agreed.
this world where people like to try to gaslight us into believing that certain movies aren't good. I'm not having it with Popeye, and I'm not having it with Hook. You guys can take those opinions and shove them up your ass. Like, I will stand for Popeye. I will stand for Hook. We are not pretending that they are not good. Even Spielberg is like, I don't like Hook, and I'm like, you're a monster.
I was actually almost honest. There was a time when I rewatched Hook and I didn't like it as much, and
Oh,
then I
dude, I would.
rewatched it. I rewatched it again recently. For we did it. Me and Maddie watched it again pre Skeleton Crew because we were kind of doing the whole Goonies and Hook thing,
Yeah,
and I was like, wow, there's a lot to love here. There's a whole lot to love here.
dude, it's I legitimately think that the people, and look, people don't like what they don't like. It is what
Yeah.
it is. I genuinely think Hook is so misunderstood. I think its take on the Peter Pan story is legitimately as whimsical, if not more, than the original Peter Pan tale in a lot of ways.
Mm.
I think it's so sincere. I think it's so moving. The storyline about him being like a father and losing what Pan was, and then him going back, and this idea that he had like kind of also abandoned the Lost Boys. So he was kind of a bad father to the Lost Boys. He's been a bad father to his kids. How do you reconcile that? Like, it's fucking brilliant. It's so good. The moment when he is with the Lost Boys for the first time in so long after everything, and the one walks up to him and he puts his hands on his face and he goes, "There you are, Peter." And the Williams score freaking just takes off, and it's called The Face of Pan. I cry every single time. I think it's beautiful. I think it's just so heartwarming and majestic. Maggie Smith is awesome in it. Dustin Hoffman is awesome in it. I think that one of the all-time. Yeah, actually, that's what I was gonna say. Is it has one of the all-time comedic performances ever from Bob Hoskins. Like, that movie is remarkable. I know that this is an Iron Man podcast, but if you have not watched Hook or you don't like Hook, I beg you to watch it with a different mindset, because the older I get, the more I love that movie.
Yeah, I can't blame you. I can't blame you for that as well. There's so much going on in that as well.
Wow,
But
that was so passionate.
it was. Do you need a second? Yeah, drink.
I actually have water. We're good. I still have water.
We're good. Okay, fine, very good.
Thank you for asking, by the way, because that could have been real bad, where it was like, oh, and now I cannot continue because I have nothing left in my system.
Yeah, fair enough. So going back from Hook back to Iron Man and everything else, let's it's funny thing is like this whole podcast has been, we really talked about this podcast in general. We used to like go like beat to beat to beat to beat throughout the movie, and we discovered that we much preferred the conversation of it all and just kind of like going all over the place whenever it comes up.
What happened, man?
What happened, which is much better for us. But what's interesting to note about this particular conversation is we haven't talked a lot about specifics of the movie in this one. We've talked a lot about the MCU. We've talked a lot about like overall feelings, overall thoughts, overall characterizations and stuff, but not a lot about the specifics. I'm not even saying that's a bad thing.
No,
it's an interesting conversation. It's interesting note, like looking at the conversation.
What's so funny about that to me, and I just had this thought, would it have been better to do one episode leading into this?
I was just thinking that, actually. I was thinking, I almost had like an MCU introduction. Like, this is what we're going to talk about. Let's talk about the MCU in general. And then, because we have been all over the MCU map. We've talked Infinity War, we've talked Doctor Strange, we've talked like going all over sorts of things. And here we are, we're supposed to be talking about Iron Man, the specific standalone movie that began the whole
thing. And yet I just gave a really impassioned speech about Hook.
Right, exactly.
This
Welcome
is
to the podcast, folks.
You know what? For all our patrons who are getting this super early, you're welcome. This is the stuff that you pay us for.
That's right, exactly. And this is stuff we do. This is how we roll at this point. But
hey, they should just be happy. I hadn't brought Doctor Who up until an hour and 22 minutes into the podcast.
There it is. And there it is, folks.
Oh, wait. And we're about to go into one. Give me 1 second. I got to count this out. 3, 2, 1. Have we talked about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny yet today?
I think we mentioned Spielberg at one point. I think that's as close as we got.
I just had to make sure that, it was there.
The bit is continuing. We're good to go.
Look, it's so funny. You're right. I was actually thinking we've been bouncing around the movie, but you know why? Because I think that this movie, weirdly enough, because it's so stripped down, because it's so simple, and that's not a dig. Like, simple is not bad. I think that we, especially nowadays, there's this idea that everything needs to be more complex, and I think that that's actually a problem. Right. I actually think simple storytelling is a good thing, and we need more of it.
Yeah.
Because there's such simplistic storytelling here at play, though, the conversation about what it spurred and what it became has been so much more interesting in some capacity.
Yeah.
Because it's all still tied to the movie itself.
Absolutely is. And it's why, again, where Marvel has struggled a bit since, like, in more recent times, is that there is more focus. It's the loss of focus. And part of that is to deal with the streaming stuff. All of a sudden, like, Disney was like, okay, Kevin, you got to put out 3 movies a year and you got to put out 3 TV shows a year. And it's like, okay, I got to do all this. And this had a sharp laser level focus of this is what's happening here. We're laying a little groundwork, but not much to go on to the next piece. And then Avengers was that big first, like,
it's to your point about how concise it is that, they've talked about in the past that part of the thing with the Obadiah Stane character and Jeff Bridges' performance is that there was a lot more that he filmed.
Yeah.
And as they were editing the film, they found with his performance that, in their opinion, less was more. So you didn't actually need as much of the stuff with Stain in the film as you thought initially.
Right.
And it allowed for the other characters to shine while he was kind of just pulling the strings in the performances themselves. And I actually think that in a lot of ways, they're right. Stain and Bridges, one as a performance and one as a character, they're kind of one and the same. There's not a lot happening, and yet they're so. Every time Bridges or Stain is on screen, they're one and the same, obviously. But
Right.
when that is happening, I can't look away because Bridges is so locked into the film. He's so good at standing toe to toe with Stark. He's so good at feeling like Stark's best friend while you can tell that there's this air of darkness underneath. You can tell, you know what's coming. You know very early on that Stain is somehow involved in everything that happened. Like, it's not a surprise.
No. What's the surprise is how the switch flips. Like when it does happen, you're just like, oh.
Well, and because it's done in such the way that they shoot it too.
Yes.
Ugh.
The public.
Oh yeah, dude. Him doing it in public because Tony not being invited to the party.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. And the whole time he had pushed for like, oh, the board wants to do this, the board wants to do that. I'm on your side. I'm trying to help you. And gets there is like, yeah, I'm the one who pushed you out. Deal with it.
Yeah. Who do you think really pushed you out?
Right. Oh shit.
Well, and Downey Jr. plays it so great because the thing he does is the look on his face. Because to him, Stain is almost like a father figure, and so he already has father issues.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's the first thing he says when he comes back, right? After they rescue him from the cave. I never got to say goodbye to my father.
Right. And it's so sad that because Tony has always had father issues. Like that's obviously an issue that stays throughout the MCU, his entire reign in the MCU. And Stain is such a willing stand-in that like it's so heartbreaking when someone who has father issues is heartbroken by the only other father figure he's known. It's so heartbreaking. It's so sad. And Bridges plays it with such a plum. It's such like
and the thing
relishing it in a way.
Yes, 100%. And the thing I love about that sequence too is that when it happens, they play it the right way.
Right.
Stark stands there in shock. There's not an initial
speechless.
Right.
Which
never happens to him.
Right, exactly.
And that's why it's so good because in any other movie, I feel like something like that happens and the person goes off the rails. The person who wants to be in the face, you go for this big dramatic moment in front of the cameras.
Yeah.
Because all the press is there. Absolutely. You have this moment, you can do it, but instead they play it quiet. He's speechless. He can't react. He doesn't do anything in public. He stands there and lets it happen. It's really heartbreaking in a great way.
Because that's exactly how it would absolutely be. That's true to the character, not the big flashy moment that some people would want to see.
Well, and I think that's, once again, goes back to a lot of what we've said about this movie, right?
Right.
This movie's not big and flashy.
No.
It's not about being big and flashy.
And not to say there's not big and flashy moments which rival some of the biggest and flashiest in the MCU, but as a whole, it picks and chooses those moments.
Yes, 100%. And I think it wisely does it.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the best part, is it's very smart in how it manages to do that. And so in this one in particular, you kind of get the idea that if we keep a lot of it small, that means that the big moments when they happen, they feel so grand. So like when Ironmonger comes out of the chains for the first time, when Potts sees him, it's a scary moment. It's almost shot like a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it's big. And it's, you know, even the voice, it's a lot lower. It's a lot gravelier. It's trying to sound like Bridges, but dark and scary. Right. And it hits. And those are those big moments. And that, again, like, it's not a huge fight scene.
Right.
But it's all about the character dynamic in the moment.
Absolutely. And Jon Favreau knows how to use horror. Because let's be honest, that cave sequence when Tony first becomes Iron Man, big time big time monster movie happening
Dude.
right there.
Well, and talk about another character thing. There, all the stuff with Yinsen, where
Great side character.
in great character, a great setup of him asking if Stark has a family, and he goes, "No, no," and he goes, "Well, one day, like hopefully you'll get there, live for something." And Stark goes, "Well, do you have a family?" He goes, "Yeah. When I get out of here, I'm going to see him." Yinsen knows from the first moment that we have like a real conversation with him that he's going to die.
Yep.
Because the reveal, of course, is that his family has died, and he
Right.
wants to die so he can be with his family.
Right.
What a like heart-wrenching type of
Beautiful
moment. But it's beautiful and it's character driven and it gives Stark so much power. And again, it plays into his father issues, right? Because here was a father who was willing to die to be with his family again.
Right. Absolutely. And
Oof.
he is like the first in a long line. He sets the template for the MCU. Have these great side characters which really help bolster up the rest of the movie. Because like you could have a superhero character, but without these kind of supporting roles that kick in, it doesn't have the MCU magic. It really doesn't.
No.
Things like Kat Dennings and Thor, fun angles there. You got like America for in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. It's like Benedict Wong in Doctor Strange is a better example at that point. These characters that are like secondary, but they're so good. They make
Aunt
you want
May?
to see more. Aunt May, perfect example as well. Hell, in the rest of the Iron Man movie, Iron Man and Spider-Man movies, Happy Hogan in Spider-Man
Dude.
movies.
Well, Deadpool.
Deadpool, yes. Absolutely.
Like because him showing up in Deadpool was such a pleasant surprise.
That it was a great way. Actually, I think that was we'll get to this. So we get to Deadpool and Wolverine also, but like I thought that was a
in
great
2 years.
2 years meta. It's a great meta way to do it. Deadpool is in the MCU. Who does he see? The architect of the guy who began the MCU.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's a great moment. I just it's so funny because I was going to bring up to you this movie also is just chock full of great side characters, whether it's Jensen, whether it's Hogan, whether it's Coulson. Coulson, who we first meet for the first time, and of course is a linchpin later within the MCU. But Coulson is such a great character. Clark Gregg is so likable. He's the very first version of a SHIELD agent we meet within this franchise. Then, of course, there's also Paul Bettany. He voices Jarvis, and what an important character that will later become.
Let me ask you about Coulson real quick. And I probably knew this at one point. Maybe I forgot, but I kind of feel like that Clark Gregg's Coulson wasn't actually meant to be a big character, but because he just hit it out of the park in Iron Man, that they kind of like developed him more and kept him around and like expanded him a little bit more.
I kind of get the same vibe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because Gregg is a very popular character actor.
Yeah.
Very good at. He was on a sitcom at around the same time because wasn't he on New Adventures of Old Christine, I believe, with Julie Louis-Dreyfus.
I want to say that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was doing another show. He was doing other things. I can 100% see a world where he was not really meant to be, but I also see him 100% being the kind of person that Favreau brings back.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so, of course, he is in Iron Man 2, and he's wonderful. But it's because his performance is so stand out. You love him being around. I love how much he seems to be pestering Pepper. I love how much, like...
In a polite fashion, though.
In a polite fashion, but also the way he gets his first... how he's going to get the interview with Stark.
Right. Yep.
Because of him just kind of coming up, and then Stark being kind of not in the moment, and then just being like, you know what? Cool. Yeah, we'll do it. Whatever.
So good. So good.
It's so good. And and I gotta say, Gregg plays it in the best way. It's so understated. It's so fun. He's a great character, and you kind of get the vibe that he's a little off kilter in an interesting way. Like in a because he's a SHIELD agent. And I like that they don't tell us that he's a SHIELD agent until the end. You hear the words, he says it out loud, but you don't really think about it. You don't really put it together if you're not thinking and paying attention. And so when he goes, just call us SHIELD at the end, and you're like, motherfucker, yes, SHIELD. It's great.
He has this great whimsy about him, and yet when he needs to be serious, he completely takes over the role and is serious. And you're like, oh, he is a badass agent, isn't he? Cool,
Mhm.
cool.
He's so good, man. And, he's a character that he appeared in quite a few shorts
Mhm.
between this time too. Like he's a great character.
Yeah,
He got to lead his own TV show for
yeah,
6 seasons when everything was said and done.
yeah. Even Agents of Shield. That's what makes Agents of Shield like such thing that I would almost want to cover again, like we talked about before. We're not going to cover Agents of Shield,
It's just
as
not
far as
happening.
this, it's just not
Sorry.
happening. But he's great in it. He is continuously great in it.
I'll say
And
this actually to that point. Actually, finish your thought and then I'll
no,
dovetail off of it.
I didn't really have much else to say. I was like, great in the Avengers as well. I had to get some great moments in
Yeah.
the Avengers as well. It's his fanhood of Captain America, brilliant.
Since we're never going to talk about Agents of Shield, there's no world. There's 6 seasons and hundreds of episodes, or 100 episodes, or whatever. It's too much for this podcast,
Yep.
unless we were doing an after show, and we're not. We're
Right.
not. We already have one after show that we have to get through.
Right.
Leave us alone. It's not happening.
Yep.
So, with that being said, Agents of Shield gets a lot of flack, I feel like. Season 1's a little rough, but once they get through the Winter Soldier stuff, because the show is clearly spinning its wheels for for Winter Soldier to come out.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
once Winter Soldier comes out and the flip happens,
Then it's
that show is awesome.
Yeah.
And pretty much stays great all the way to the end. The Ghost Rider arc is amazing. Like, there's a lot of really good stuff with LMDs. They really dive into a lot of the Marvel Universe. Fury showing up in it is fantastic. Like, they set up how the Avengers get the helicarrier in Age of Ultron. Like, there's a lot of really fun things in it. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it really hits it out of the park when it needs to. And
Absolutely.
I think it gets a lot of flack for being an ABC TV show, but it's kind of the most real issue to issue Marvel comic book that I can think of.
You're not. No, you're not wrong. I mean, I never really thought of it that way, but you're definitely not wrong.
Yeah,
It-
that's kind of why I said it, because that's what it is, right? Like, it's a week to week version of a Marvel comic book.
I kind of fell out on it a little bit at some point, but I went back and finished it, and I agree. It just had a great week to week run of. It felt like like what we were talking about before, like how sometimes people get away from it if it's not connected to the main MCU storyline. This was its own self-contained thing for the most part as well, but it works as a self-contained thing and had its own little mythology it was creating. With only Clark Gregg really being the only real connection, I think. He was the only real connection, wasn't he?
He was the only real connection up front, although Colby Smulders is in the first episode.
Right, that's right. I remember that.
Or is it the first episode? Yeah, she's in the first. She might come back. Fury is in it. There's a couple of other characters who do pop up throughout. Because Sif shows up in a couple of episodes. The Howling Commandos are in a couple of episodes. Agent Carter's in one of the episodes. So there are other like overt connections, of course. Like, again, you do see artifacts from other MCU movies and things, but eventually the show kind of starts doing its own thing, because after the Ghost Rider arc, it kind of becomes its own show,
Right.
and honestly, the show is probably better for it also.
Fair. Absolutely fair.
Because once it gets out of the MCU's bigger shadow, it kind of becomes its own thing, and I think that's even more exciting.
Well, yeah, definitely. I know Feige worked with Perlmutter about it, and we kind of like did its own thing. And I think at that point it was kind of like, well, we're not going to connect, so we're just going to do our own thing. And it's definitely better for it for sure.
Well, because eventually it leaves the like standard MCU, because they start time traveling and dimension hopping, basically.
Because it was always going to connect, because the biggest part about the biggest thing in Marvel was the films. TV was always going to be secondary, so you couldn't tell. It's kind of like what Star Wars has a problem with now, as far as like the books go. I used to love reading the expanded universe in Star Wars, because it did so much, and there were such stakes there. The new Disney expanded universe, for the most part, outside of the High Republic, it's all like connected to based on like a movie or a TV show. And you realize the movie and TV shows are always going to take precedence. So nothing really big of note is going to happen in the books, the comics. Like, all the important events are going to be in the movie or TV. High Republic is its own thing on its own grounds. That's why High Republic is probably the best Star Wars has to offer as far as that goes now.
You're 100% not wrong. And yet I'd argue that some of the best stuff right now in the bigger Star Wars, like Disney era lore, is some of the stuff in the books, which is so interesting, because there is a lot of stuff in Catalyst that makes Rogue One a much stronger and better movie. There's a lot of stuff in Shadow of the Sith that is actually equally as important you know what I mean?
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. Well, I guess the difference is, though, it's all contingent upon what's going on in the movie, the big
Oh,
screen.
no. That I agree with.
Catalyst becomes it's a good story, but it's not the most important story. Like, it leads into what the more important story is. Catalyst is great developing the characters, again, but it's more of like a character piece rather than like getting its own.
So
like,
fascinating, because I actually think that Catalyst is equally as important as Rogue One, and I actually think it's a mistake that they haven't adapted it. I think it should have. I have been making the argument for a while that they've never really like overtly adapted any of the books, and if they were going to do any, Catalyst would be like the perfect start for it, because I think that there's a lot of the stuff involving certain characters that would be incredibly great, especially because Andor is so popular. For them to do that,
I would argue Lost Stars if we're gonna do that, but because that's a lot.
Oh,
lot
no.
of fun.
My argument only for this is because it means we get more Mads in Star Wars.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I want more Mads in Star Wars, and I want to see more of Krennic. So if I get that,
Right.
cool.
That's fair.
Yeah. So that is my biggest reason, and is I just want to see more of Krennic and see more of Mads. So that's where we're at.
Fair enough.
I have to say, when it comes to this film, Iron Man, not Rogue One, just to be clear, one of my favorite things about it, though, and it continues to be, origin stories are a dime a dozen. You can watch any version of an origin story for most of these characters we've seen and met. We've talked about it a bunch. I love how whimsical this movie is, with Stark having to learn to be Iron Man.
So much.
It's so fun. It is so fun.
Sets the tone of MCU humor. There's always people who have said something. There's the Whedon-esque era of it, but no, this was there before Joss Whedon got hold of the Avengers.
Way before.
The MCU humor started and with Tony Stark and this
Favs.
and Jon Favreau, exactly. Oh, sorry, Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau. The sequence there where they're building, and he's building the suit, and he's got the droids with him. Droids, the robot helpers that he's yelling at her. He's
if you douse me again, I'm going to send you to a community college or whatever it is.
It is so good.
So good.
The humor is there right throughout, and that's actually the heart. It's one of the hearts of the film. Like, it wouldn't be the MCU without it. It wouldn't be Iron Man without that little bit of humor. It'd I don't want to say it'd be boring because there's a good story there, but like that added. It's like seasoning. It's like that seasoning is needed. It makes it much better off of that with it.
Well, and they find little ways, right? Because when Tony comes home and he's finally changing out the arc reactor for like a better version, basically one he didn't build in a cave with a box of scraps. There's this moment where he has Paltrow's Pepper come down to help him get it out, and so she's like, "Well,
Operation."
Operation. What do you want me to do with this one? He goes, just toss it. Like, we don't need it. And so it leads to this great moment where she brings it back, and it says a reminder that Tony Stark has a heart.
That's the last time we see that.
Then he uses it, right?
Yeah.
Because the stuff with Stain, where Stain tries to kill him. So what does he need? He needs to use the old arc reactor, and so he uses the one where proof that Tony Stark has a heart.
Right.
And I love that. And of course, then it shows up again in Deadpool and Wolverine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the little things like that where it's humor peppered in, but also like very poignant.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny because I actually texted you that last night about the Whedon stuff. I get really irritated anytime I hear that. People want to use Whedon as some sort of scapegoat for obvious reason. Now Joss Whedon was a monster. We're not going to pretend otherwise. But it's not like him doing humor in the Avengers was not new to the MCU.
Right.
And we will talk about it a lot when we get to First Avenger. We'll talk about it a lot when we get to Thor. Those movies are full of humor. Dude, The Incredible Hulk has a lot of humor.
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff was very true. They were always quippy. There was always one-off liners. That stuff always existed. I'm not really sure why people think that there was some overnight change.
There really wasn't.
There really wasn't. It's exactly as it's always been.
I mean, I understand if some people like think the humor is too much now, or they feel like it's getting stale to have that kind of repetitiveness to it. I
Sure.
could kind of understand that to a degree. It hasn't failed me. I still like it. I still enjoy the
Me
quips.
too.
I still enjoy it. But definitely, as long as they're the story, that's the important part. The story is the most important thing, and that's the balance that needs to happen. Because sometimes the quips can get overpowering, but mostly if they're in this, especially in this movie, they are just like I said, the seasoning. Then it makes very perfect recipe.
Hmm. Oh yeah, it works, and that's why that whole sequence when he's learning how to fly, basically,
Mhm.
and learning to become Iron Man is so good. It
Mm,
just really lands, man.
yeah.
Because again, it's peppered with that little bit of humor, but it's also you're really rooting for this guy because he's starting to turn around.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
He
and
has those
again,
moments. You're like, oh, this is what you want to see. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
and again, it's not like this movie is super high stakes. There's
Right.
no end of the world dilemma. Like Tony basically wants to stay on the board. I love that the biggest stakes of this thing is the company might go away because he doesn't want to make weapons anymore. What a great turn for the character.
Right.
Like there's not a lot going on under the hood of this movie, weirdly
Right.
enough.
Yeah.
And that's not
It's
a bad thing.
Funny thing is, I would actually argue that it's almost like two movies. Like there's like the pre-cave stuff and
Mhm.
the cave sequence, and then the post-cave stuff. They're almost like two separate movies. They work together and they gel together well to make a complete movie, but it's really kind of separate stories in a way.
Mhm.
Which is funny because they're just two short stories put together. Which I guess is how comic books sometimes is made, issue wise, for example. But um, yeah, that again, you mentioned the building of the suit. I had a quote or I had a note wrote down toy building montage. John loves this shit.
Yeah.
Like the 10% thing, like it was like the 1%, 2%.
Yeah.
That's right, 1%, and he flips it to the wall, like stuff that like obviously he would have broken his back, and like it's ridiculously over the top, but like you laugh because it's fun and it's funny and you got a sense of humor to it. John Favreau loves that shit. Now like probably his favorite part as well. Had such
Well,
his fingerprints all over it.
yeah, and that's why he likes the sequence once he's learning to fly and he doesn't have the icing figured
Yes,
out and he falls out of the sky,
yes,
that whole thing is fun. The kid on the Ferris wheel who sees him,
yeah.
like these little moments because Favreau's good at capturing people seeing this.
Yeah.
It's actually this I will say. I don't always feel like the MCU is good at capturing the everyday moments of everyday humans seeing the heroes. Um,
And I would actually add on to that is that they kind of gotten stale with it at this point because they kind of do the same thing over and over again. It feels like it hasn't. It feels like after 20 films, it should be different a little bit, like
well,
this
I
way we're
thought Born
used to
Again
it.
handled that quite well, in fact, to that point.
Yes, correct. Born
Uh,
Again did.
Yeah. So we're getting to a place where they're starting to change it up, obviously, but there is some truth to that because you watch stuff like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man film or even the X-Men films, at least the first two. There's a real sense of like how do real people interact with these characters,
Right.
and I think that Favreau does a good job in this of at least at this time, obviously we've learned now since in hindsight that there were other heroes within the world,
Right.
but it wasn't as commonplace. So to have this dude flying around in a suit around Los Angeles was a new experience for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what does that do? Like the family in the car during the fight scene against Ironmonger. How do you react in that situation?
Good question.
And
Good
we see
question.
it.
And yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's what I mean is seeing more of that is good. Seeing more of that is fun. That type of stuff goes a long way and it adds to I know it's going to sound weird, but realism. And we're not talking like a hyper realism because it's not a grounded film by any stretch of the imagination.
No, not at all.
But
I
it's
just said that. Yeah.
right, exactly. Which is weird when you consider in the same year arguably the other film that was equally as chased by studios of trying to capture the magic was The Dark Knight,
Yeah.
which was uber realistic to almost to a fault.
Right. And in both, it's funny how both Dark Knight and Iron Man changed things for not to be the better or the worse, but they changed how they were very influential. Like
Yes,
going forward,
100%.
DC went with the grounded side of things. They wanted to go dark. They wanted to go gritty, and Iron Man went for the more superhero-y, comic booky kind of things. Because quite frankly, when you look at all the superhero films that we've seen, like going back to the granddaddy of them all, Superman, Batman, even the early Spider-Mans and X-Men's, we've gotten to a point where the MCU specifically has allowed comic book movies to be comic book movies. Like the X-Men wouldn't let you have the yellow, it had to be the black leather outfit because that's the movie version. They have to be more serious, a little more
They even joke
darker.
about it.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, what are you doing? Our MCU lets these silly, goofy things happen. That's in the comic. That happens in the movies, so it makes it feel more real and comfortable to people
We
who love the.
literally got yellow spandex last year.
Yeah, we did. That's
We got
right.
literal yellow spandex with the cowl.
Yes,
Are you fucking kidding me?
right? It never would have happened before. Now we're getting that kind of thing, and it starts here. It starts here.
It
I mean,
no,
can
it
you
does.
imagine? Can you
And it's
imagine Iron
really
Man in like
it's
the
wild. You're
80s,
right. And
90s?
it's funny because in some capacity, no, number one, I could never.
No.
I'm so glad it didn't happen before Marvel.
Yes,
honestly.
so am I. Oh my god, it would have been they would have been different color. It would have been like black and it would have been War Machine type colors, and like it would have been like a more serious militaristic kind of thing, and like Tony Stark would have been arrogant but not
Not
charismatic.
fun.
Not fun. Not fun.
I'll say
Charisma would have been
this.
gone.
I am fascinated because Marvel actually did kind of at one point though, if you think about it, they kind of leaned into it.
Yeah.
About not being as comic booky because they really make it a point in the first Thor movie that
Yeah.
he is like, well, see, you guys call it magic, but for us, it's our science.
Right.
And they do try to do that. But then just as quickly, once Avengers is through, they're like,
No.
why? Why? Like,
They
why
course
do that?
corrected.
Yeah, and they course corrected very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm glad because I think the thing that I'm gonna take away from this the most in some capacity is that this film loves comic books. It loves being fun. It loves that it's character driven. It loves Marvel like as a entity, and
Yeah.
it loves being its own beating heart. This was this movie was proof that Marvel had a heart. And so for me, I think that my big takeaway is that while there's not a lot going on under the hood, it's actually just enough to get the ball rolling for this thing to really start to take off. Because once again, if this movie doesn't work,
Dead on
this whole
arrival.
thing doesn't work.
DOA. Yeah, absolutely. And I gotta say, it's kind of funny when we've talked about Marvel's, problems recently or whatever. And there seems to be this very rose-colored look back at the beginning of the MCU. And we're praising Iron Man a lot. We're not really being too critical of it. It's not a perfect film by any way, shape, or form. And the MCU in the beginning, phase one, is by far not a perfect phase. There's a lot of
No.
hit and miss moments in there. I think why we give Iron Man more of a pass than others is because of how much the standard it did set. Like, so it looks like that its faults are easily looked past. Like when I said that before about the two movies in one, the whole movie, look at the story, it's not exactly the most cohesive story. It's like
No.
not exactly the best written storyline. It goes different places. It's all contingent on Robert Downey Jr.'s performance. And that, because that works, the movie works. But the action and stuff is all sorts of like all over the place at times.
And Stain is not an interesting villain.
No, Jeff Bridges is good, but Stain
Yeah.
himself kind of like, especially the Ironmonger part. I actually much prefer Stain than Ironmonger.
Yeah, I the funny thing is like I love the Ironmonger reveal.
Right. Yeah.
And then after that, I don't care. I think
No.
the fight is so boring.
It
It is.
is.
It is.
It
Like
is.
are they amazing in it? Yes, because they're incredible. Is it great that it calls back on the thing about the icing? Yes, amazing. Like there's some good callback type stuff. But it's not interesting.
No, it isn't at all. It almost loses me a little bit at that point.
Yeah.
I kind of check out.
it's funny because for as much shit as Iron Man 2 gets, its third act is so much better, and it feels so much more personal.
I'm very interested to rewatch it because I've always looked at Iron Man 2 as like probably one of my least favorite MCU films. I'm not gonna lie, so I'm kind of very
I
curious
get
to
it.
go there.
Trust me, I get it. I tend to like it more than most people,
Right.
but I also just see so much of the good in it that
Okay. I get it. Any last thing? I have a couple of quick hit notes I can give. Do you have
Oh,
anything else you want to add
yes.
on? Go ahead.
Love that this is the beginning. Like obviously the Marvel movies before this that were not made by Marvel had Stan Lee cameos.
Oh yes, Stanley.
But
That was in my notes. But yeah, sure. Go ahead.
love that this is the beginning of Stan Lee being in every one of these movies as the Watcher.
Yes.
Think that this is again, this is not a thing that we don't learn this until much later, but just love that this is the beginning of the Watcher being in all the movies, or a character who hangs around the Watcher, like
Right.
however you want to look at it. His Hugh Hefner cameo is so good.
So fun.
It's so fun, and I do love that this kind of they build this universe in our own universe while slowly moving it into its own thing,
Right.
and I really appreciate that. This is just a good flick, man. Like, it's fun. It's again, it's a little messy at times. It's not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't need to be.
Right. Exactly.
And that's okay because sometimes it's actually just okay for something to be this good.
Right. Absolutely. Last quick bits I have. Love the cheeseburger moment.
Yeah, cheeseburger first.
Cheeseburger first, and then I mean, how that's called back later on. Of course, great callback
Wait.
later on.
There is one thing we do have to talk about.
Wait, let me finish my notes, and then if it still hasn't been,
yeah, but I want to do it before you get to it. I want to do it before you get to it.
No, you can't.
Because it's very important.
Okay, fine.
How great is it that this movie ends with I am Iron Man?
That was my last note, just so you know.
I know. No, I figured, but I wanted to get ahead of it because it's actually a bigger conversation in some capacity.
Okay. That's why I thought we'd end the conversation. I thought, get my notes out of the way.
Fine.
See, you ruined it. All right, anyway.
Did I, though?
Cheeseburger. Because I'm so close. Anyway, Tony and Rhodey's relationship has never been better. I will stick to that. I think this is the best relationship they have on screen is in this one. And staying at 10 rings is what makes it messy to me. It's the 10 rings of it all with this other kind of half-assed bad guy character that's behind it. And then you learn Stain is involved, and that part is messy to me.
Yeah.
Now let's hit the final thing.
I'll say this. The 10 rings thing is a little messy. Eventually, we do kind of get back to it, and it's kind of dealt with.
Right.
They've still not fully... It wasn't until Shang-Chi that the 10 rings actually seemed to matter. It took a little long for them to finally make that a thing. I digress. I adore that this movie decides to end on the I am Iron Man moment because what a way to end one of these superhero movies. We've never seen this before. The secret identity is always the thing, right? And so for this movie for him to have this whole conversation where he's like, this story doesn't seem real. No one's going to believe this. No one's going to believe that this is what happened and Iron Man is my bodyguard.
Which is a long-standing comic book trope. Iron Man comic trope. In the comic books, Iron Man is Tony Stark's bodyguard. That's how it is for long. Yes, he does go public a couple times, but there is a long run of Iron Man comics where Iron Man and Avengers and everything else, where everybody thinks that Tony Stark and Iron Man are separate, and Iron Man is just Tony Stark's bodyguard. So that what makes it better is because when they go this way, and you hear Phil Coulson gives Tony this speech, and this is the story, and he's like, Iron Man's bodyguard. Oh, okay, that's what we're going to do because that's what we know in the comic books. MCU takes that and flips it on its edge and says, yeah, we know what the comic books say. This is the MCU. This is something a little different, though.
Yeah, and it was such a breath of fresh air for a character to be like, this is who I am.
Right. Yes.
And to go public, to have it end in a way where it was like, what a fucking cliffhanger, too. Because that happens and you're like, immediately, I want another movie.
Right. You want what's happens now? Yeah, exactly. Now we got to come out, and it comes. Of course, they use Iron Man at that point, the song which we were waiting for the entire time anyway. But I love that whole bit. Like Rhodey, like he starts going off a little bit, and you're like, okay, and Rhodey's like, stick to the cards.
Yeah, stick to the cards, because Coulson very much, of course, like we said earlier, this is Shield's idea. This is how it's going to be. So good, dude.
But Tony's never been one to listen to authority, so that's what it is. I love it.
What a great ending. What a great ending to it. Again, I think the movie ends so well and starts so well and has so much good in the middle that we forgive a lot of the shortcomings of, like, the bad guy's kind of boring. The last fight kind of sucks. Like, and again, it's not a dig. It's they're fun. It's just not what we're also like. We're fucking spoiled within a movie.
Right.
What a third act can look like.
Right. 100%. So, all right. Let us rank this puppy on a scale of 1 to 11, because we always turn things up to 11 here on PLD Projects. We have no prior things. We usually go through our prior rankings. This is our first ranking of the MCU. Man, I have to say, this was a hard ranking for me.
Insane.
Because unlike any other franchise, like a lot of franchises we go through, it makes it easier. There's like 5 or 6 films, and there's a lot of breadth in there. When you have 20, 30 projects, you're like kind of like, there's a lot of like, well, what is better than what? And there's going to be a lot of because you got a lot of closeness here. I almost want to aim low, because I know there's films coming up in this saga that I'm going to definitely rank higher.
And not just that, you missed the one big thing about a lot of these franchises when we do them. Generally speaking, it's the first films that we tend to rank the highest, because generally they're the higher movies.
Great point.
And yet I would argue, for as great as this film is, it's not, for me, one of the best films in the MCU.
No, I believe it's probably mid-level.
And it's weird, because I think that there's a rose-tinted glasses around this movie. I hear people talk about this a lot, about how it's the best MCU movie, and I am baffled every time I hear that.
Which is funny you're saying this after we just basically like gave it a standing ovation down this entire podcast, right?
No, right, because it's an amazing movie.
Right.
And it's great. Right. But like when I hear people say top MCU, that's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fuck, dude, this is really difficult.
I think I'm gonna give it, and I initially was settling on a 7.5, which just seems way too low.
That's too low. I feel like.
But I did that. I aimed low specifically, like I said, because I know there's other ones that are going to be higher. And I feel like this is almost a mid-level MCU in a way.
But you know, the thing is that mid-level MCU
is good.
It's really good, and that's the problem.
So I think what I settled on was to bump it up and give it a solid 8 out of 11.
Amazing. You know why?
Why?
8.5.
8.5. Okay.
It's still like, it's a lot lower than you might anticipate with how we talked about it, but I think our words matter more than an actual rating. Personally.
Yeah, I agree too. It's just kind of a
fun thing for us. Yeah. But boy, dude, like I was sitting there when you said it, and I was like, it's weird because for how much we talked it up,
it felt like we were giving it 11 almost, even a 10.5.
No, because then immediately towards the end, we were like, by the way, we've been hyping it up, but like the villain's actually really terrible, and like the action's not that great. You suddenly start to pull it back.
I think what it is that we love it more than it being a good film. Yes. The things that there's a lot of negative stuff about it, but we just overlook all of the negative stuff because of how much what we do love, we love a lot.
Yeah.
And that is Downey Jr., that is the Pepper Potts relationship, that is the Johnny Fabs of it all, and like
the training sequences of it all.
Training sequences, the comic bookiness of it, the ability to fly our geek boner, basically.
Yeah.
The entirety
our
of it.
Geek boners are just flying out in the wind, man. They're just straight and narrow and just out there flying around. And
spoiler alert, that was one of our podcast things we were thinking about. No. 2 geeky boners flying around.
I feel like that's almost worse than anything else we could have come up with.
man.
I gotta say though, we had a good joke about like we were talking about if you like condense our name, and I was like, we didn't really think this one through either.
We
Made
are
me
too
laugh,
mad.
though. Just
Okay.
it was not an intentional thing. Oh, dude, we forgot to bring up Peter Billingsley is in this. Ralphie from A Christmas Story has a cameo.
He does. That's
He
right.
does, and I just want to note that Ralphie has a cameo. He did not shoot his eye out, as it turns out.
He did not. As he was a scientist who worked for Stain, right? That's what he was.
Yeah.
He was the
He's the one who gets screamed at.
Yeah.
About the box of scraps.
I am not Tony Stark. That's right.
Yeah.
That's the voice. So, all right, man. Well, that's going to do it for us here on our first ever PLD Projects exclusive.
This
Patreon
podcast is almost as long as the movie itself. We are at 2 hours and 5 minutes, and the movie is 2 hours and 6. I just
but
that noted.
I want to pitch that by the time we get through our goodbyes, it will be over. It'll be over the length at this point. Just want to know if you have made it this far. This was recorded on March 11th, 2025. Even if you're listening to it in November or December for the first time. If you do want to get further and get ahead, join the Patreon at patreon.com/PLD Projects. Some great
wow, sly motherfucker over here. Sly.
And in Buckingham. Also, YouTube membership as well. I have that out there available as well. Also get early access to other videos as well. PJ, where can the folks find you?
You guys can find me wherever comic book movies are sold. No, that doesn't make sense. Podcasts, sure. No, you can find me here hanging out with this gentleman over here next to me. You can find me on all the socials at PJ Campbell. Usually just Blue Sky and Instagram these days. The bad place is very bad these days. I just don't go over there anymore. But yeah, just find me here. And you guys, again, if you're here in November, I'm really glad you're here and discovering us. Maybe not for the first time, but if you're enjoying this, definitely jump on the Patreon because we're a lot farther along.
Yes,
than you are understanding at this point. So you can hear us go absolutely apeshit for a lot of other Marvel stuff. And you know what, man? Maybe there's some one-offs in there. Maybe I finally get Puppet Master in here. We don't know. Anything could happen because I've been stumping for Puppet Master for the better part of 3 years.
Anything can happen except for Puppet Master.
You are a monster, sir.
I love the
you know what? You're probably not wrong. Charles Band probably doesn't even want to talk about Puppet Master as much as I want to talk about Puppet
That's
Master.
true. No one wants to talk about it as much as you do. That's absolutely true. And I'm someone who actually doesn't.
That's not true. William Harold also wants to talk about Puppet Master as much as I do.
That's true. He's been definitely pushing that for a long time now. You can find me at the Blue Sky as well. Paul _Denuzio at the Blue Sky, at bsky.social. You can find me all over the podcast here every week now. We're recording every other week. I almost said the old one. 2 middle-aged geeks.
We are no longer mediocre. I thought we had this conversation, sir.
We did have this conversation, and it's still a little muscle memory there for me. Review, I do a podcast about V. Hopefully, I'm still doing this by the time November rolls around. Who knows what the schedule is at this point? You know what? Just check the channel. I'm on there. You'll find out then.
And I believe we'll also, if you are looking forward to it, you can go back at this point, or you could be looking forward to next month at this point. Either way, we talk Doctor Who also. So yes. We have done what I'm just going to call it season 1B at this point, very clearly off of the trailer that we got. I've been very convinced that Doctor Who was just splitting its season in half, and it's very, very obvious now.
They're putting out there season 2, so there's no confusion, but it really basically is the second part of season 1.
Yeah, and so we should be looking forward to the Christmas special next month in November if you're watching this not in real time.
That's right.
So I might as well just pump that out. Like, if you're here in November, cool, man, Doctor Who next month. And if you're here in March, cool, Doctor Who next month, because season 2 actually starts in April. So let's go.
Let's go.
Wow, brilliant. That was one of the most brilliant versions of a seg I think I've ever done.
That was pretty damn good. Pretty damn good. I got to give you that for sure. All right, folks. We will see you next time here on the Patreon exclusive as well as on the main channel. That's PJ Campbell. I'm PLD. We're covering Iron Man because we love movies. And eventually we'll get back to horror as well because we love horror movies specifically. But yeah, it'll happen. Peace out, MFs.